Chapter 57 The Wine to Send Him on His Way. Chapter 57 The Wine to Send Him on His Way. Winter had passed and spring was here. 2 years ago, perfected Tianhuang inadvertently passed by Pingyang town and brought 2 people away with him, and that directly or indirectly changed the fate of many people. Zhou Dingyun was one of them. During the 2 years of cultivation in Iridescent Cloud's palace, Zhou Dingyun often thought to himself that without perfected Tianhuang, he would still be at the prison in Pingyang town, munching on the cold buns, drinking the icy water, trying hard to please the prison guards. But right now, Zhou Dingyun was a Qi refinement warrior. He was a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace. Although he was an outer sect disciple, whenever Zhou Dingyun went to the mortal world, he would be respected and envied by the surrounding mortals. He could decide the life and death of every mortal. Although he was an outer sect disciple, he wore the Taoist robe of Iridescent Cloud's palace. The cultivators from the small clans might have higher cultivation base, but they would show respect for him whenever they saw him. Zhou Dingyun enjoyed this feeling very much. However, that was not enough. Whenever Zhou Dingyun enjoyed the glory of being a Qi refinement warrior, a scene would flash through his mind automatically. There was no moon that night. He knelt in front of a green-robed scholar, tears on his face as he begged for mercy. This scene felt like a thorn that was stuck deeply in Zhou Dingyun's throat. It had become increasingly intolerable and uncomfortable over the past 2 years. The higher Zhou Dingyun's realm was, the more he could not forget the scene. No matter what achievements he had accomplished, it could not erase what happened that night, as well as the shame that the scholar brought him. After cultivation, Zhou Dingyun knew very well that if he did not remove this thorn, it would become his mental demons in the future. The solution was simple. He would return to Pingyang town to kill the scholar and annihilate his entire family clan. And right now, the time had come. Zhou Dingyun had the earth spirit root. He managed to reach level 8 Qi condensation within 2 years. His speed of cultivation was ranked the top few among other cultivators in his sect. Of course, Shenmingqi, who joined the sect with him, had heaven's spirit root. She had reached perfected Qi condensation and was only one step to breaking through Foundation Establishment realm. There is definitely no way to defeat Senior Marshal Sister Shen. But level 8 Qi condensation is enough. I suppose there is no Qi refinement warrior in the entire Pingyang town. Seeing that Pingyang town was right before him, Zhou Dingyun could feel his blood boiling. He could not help but laugh. In the eyes of the normal folks, there was nothing more proud and happy than a glorious homecoming. And right now, Zhou Dingyun had done even better than a glorious homecoming by coming back as a Qi refinement warrior. Zhou Dingyun was here not only to annihilate the Su family, but also to make Su Zimo kneel in front of him and to torture him viciously, as well as to reduce the prison of Pingyang town to rubble, killing all the prison guards that used to humiliate him. By the way, Su Zimo's younger sister has good looks. I cannot kill her. Ha! Zhou Dingyun smiled with a lecherous grin. By the time Zhou Dingyun reached Pingyang town, it was already midnight. It was a dark and gusty night. It was no different from that night 2 years ago. There was no one on the empty street. Zhou Dingyun maneuvered his flying sword to reach Su Zimo's mansion. Zhou Dingyun felt deeply about the familiar mansion. 2 years ago, when he was here to assassinate Su Zimo, he had to climb over the wall carefully to get into the mansion. Right now, he could be open about going into the mansion. To put it more accurately, he could fly into the mansion. He wondered how Su Zimo would react when he saw him execute sword kinesis flight. Would he be scared stiff? Would he kneel down right away, kowtowing to him, begging him for mercy? Zhou Dingyun was full of anticipation. Zhou Dingyun came to the courtyard and looked around. It was no different from how it was 2 years ago. It was the beginning of spring. The peach blossom tree at the courtyard looked the same. The flowers had blossomed and the petals had fallen to the ground. The only change was that there were a sanguine bough and a long saber on the stone table under the peach blossom tree. There was a squeaking sound. The door to one of the rooms in the courtyard opened, and out came a green-robed scholar. The green-robed scholar carried a jar of wine, looked calm and composed. He went to the stone table in the courtyard and took a seat casually, pouring 2 bowls of wine. He looked at Zhou Dingyun, who was in midair, as he said calmly, "Come down, I will treat you to a drink." Zhou Dingyun was stunned. He had thought of all kinds of possibilities when they met, but the scene in front of him was totally beyond his expectation. There was no shock. There was no fear. There was no pleading for mercy. There was nothing at all. The green-robed scholar looked calm and indifferent, making Zhou Dingyun even more eager to kill him. "What's with the pretense?" Zhou Dingyun sneered. He had done a check on Su Zimo. He had no spirit chi. This meant that 2 years had passed, and Su Zimo was still immortal. Zhou Dingyun was fearless as he descended into the courtyard, coming up to the stone table, asking all of a sudden, "You seem to have known all along that I will be back, is that so?" "Yes." Su Zimo nodded. "When I let you off 2 years ago, I knew that you would return." "Haha, scholars are indeed smart." Zhou Dingyun broke out into laughter. There was mockery in his eyes, but he changed his tone right then. "However, your so-called wits seem childish to me." Zhou Dingyun had been observing Su Zimo. He was hoping to sense something from his expression. But Zhou Dingyun was disappointed. Su Zimo looked at him calmly. His eyes were clear, and there was not even the slightest bit of fluctuation in his mood. Zhou Dingyun smiled dryly. "Fate is so amazing. No one would have imagined that the ruffian from Pingyang Town 2 years ago would become a Qi refinement warrior and underwent such huge changes. Oh, by the way, do you know what is a Qi refinement warrior?" Zhou Dingyun looked at Su Zimo with provocation in his eyes. Su Zimo sighed softly with emotion as he nodded. "Yes, the changes are tremendous. Do you know why I chose this time to come back?" Zhou Dingyun asked with a raised eyebrow. "Why? 2 years ago, right here, at a night like this during the same season, it's the 2 of us as well, but—" Zhou Dingyun no longer hid his murderous intent in his eyes, as he said coldly, "The outcome tonight will be vastly different from that night 2 years. Su Zimo smiled and suddenly pushed the wine bowl toward Zhou Dingyun. He nodded and said, "Take a drink." Zhou Dingyun was on alert. He could not understand why Su Zimo was so calm and composed. At the sight of the bowl of wine in front of him, a thought flashed in Zhou Dingyun's mind. He could not help but sneer. "Second young Master Su, I suppose there is something about the wine? So this is what you are counting on? It's a pity that I have seen through it." Zhou Dingyun thought that Su Zimo had poisoned the wine and was in a hurry for him to drink the wine. "There is nothing with the wine. But there is indeed something with the name of the wine." Su Zimo shook his head. "What is it?" Zhou Dingyun asked automatically. "This the wine to send you on your way." Su Zimo raised his head to look at Zhou Dingyun, as he said calmly, "After drinking this bowl of wine, I will send you on your way." Upon hearing this, Zhou Dingyun could feel the chills on his back. The glance that Su Zimo gave him reminded him of that night 2 years ago. Chapter 58 Pierced Through the Heart by Countless Arrows. Chapter 58 Pierced Through the Heart by Countless Arrows. Zhou Dingyun seemed to have gotten a big shock. He jumped up, retreated a few steps, reaching his palm toward the storage bag at his waist. He narrowed his eyes and looked solemn. Calm down, Zhou Dingyun assured himself. "I am a level 8 Qi refinement warrior. I underwent a total transformation and am no longer the same person 2 years ago. I will never be frightened by a scholar. Su Zimo is a mere mortal, what could he count on? Aren't you going to drink?" Su Zimo smiled, shaking his head. "If you don't drink, you won't have the chance anymore." "You are bluffing!" Zhou Dingyun gave a loud shout. He slapped his palm on the storage bag, maneuvering a flying sword, shooting out a ray of spirit chi from his fingertip. The flying sword shone brightly. Inferior grade spirit weapon. Chi! Zhou Dingyun had the flying sword in his hand. He calmed himself and pointed forward. Right then, the flying sword turned into a ray of light, reaching Su Zimo within seconds. Su Zimo did not move a single inch. He seemed like a monk who was in meditation. The flying sword was right in front of Su Zimo's glabella. It would pierce into it if it went 1 inch further. However, Su Zimo maintained his composure, and he did not bat his eyelids at all. Zhou Dingyan thought that Su Zimo must be scared stiff. He could not help but grin hideously. Su Zimo, if you kneel down to beg me for mercy, I can consider not killing you. I think you have gotten something very wrong here. Su Zimo stretched out his palm, gently holding the flying sword in front of him as he said calmly, "It is the same place, the same season, the same night, and the two of us, but there will not be too much of a difference in the outcome." There was a look of malice in Zhou Dingyan's eyes, as he saw how Su Zimo used his palm to grab hold of the sharp inferior grade spirit weapon. "What a fool!" Su Zimo continued. "If there are any changes, it would be that 2 years ago I let you off, but today, you won't be able to leave. Damn, how dare you speak conceited nonsense! I will maim one of your palms first." Zhou Dingyan yelled, ruthlessness in his eyes. He maneuvered the flying sword, exerting force for it to spin. In the meantime, Su Zimo's palm rapped and hit the sword. Pa! There was a sound as loud as thunder. Zhou Dingyan was given a shock. It was not the flying flesh and spurting blood that he was expecting. Instead, Su Zimo's palm was intact. Zhou Dingyan was even more surprised that he had lost control of the flying sword. How could this be? The next moment, Zhou Dingyan turned from shock to aghast at the sight that he witnessed. Su Zimo spread his palm and the flying sword lay quietly on his palm. It was covered with cracks. Su Zimo released his hand and the inferior grade spirit weapon turned into fragments, scattering onto the ground. An inferior grade spirit weapon was deemed useless. Zhou Dingyan stared at Su Zimo, whose eyes had gradually turned cold. His heart sank deeply to the bottom as well. He finally realized that 2 years had passed and he had become a level 8 Chi Refinement warrior, but second young Master Su who was in front of him was no longer the frail scholar back then. He suddenly realized that when Su Zimo said that everything had changed tremendously just now, Su Zimo was not referring to him but to Su Zimo himself. The bowl of wine on the round table was really meant to send him on his way. But Zhou Dingyan still could not figure out why Su Zimo could shatter his inferior grade spirit weapon with his blood and flesh. Zhou Dingyan did not wish to find out the reason. Right now, his only thought was to leave this place and try his best to steer clear of Su Zimo. Zhou Dingyan took out a flying sword from his storage bag. This was a pseudo-spirit weapon. It was already unimaginable for outer sect disciples to receive inferior-grade spirit weapons in Iridescent Cloud's palace. However, it had been shattered by Su Zimo's palm. Zhou Dingyan stepped onto the flying sword, rose into the air and flew out of the mansion. Before he left, Zhou Dingyan could not help but look back. Su Zimo was not in a hurry to get up. He drank the bowl of strong wine on the stone table unhurriedly before he stood up, tied the long saber to his waist, carried the quiver on his back and took the sanguine bow in his hands. Zhou Dingyan swallowed his saliva, feeling nervous. He turned and used all his energy to maneuver the flying sword, speeding toward the far distance. The wind howled in his ears. Zhou Dingyan could not help but shiver as the wind blew at him. He did not know since when he broke out in cold sweats. Zhou Dingyan left Pingyang town in no time. The Tsunglang mountain range was not far in the distance. It was pitch dark and he could vaguely hear growling sounds made by the spirit beasts. Zhou Dingyan let out a long breath, putting his heart at rest. Right then, Zhou Dingyan heard a cold voice coming from behind him. "Do you still remember the vow you made on that night 2 years ago when you knelt down to beg for mercy?" Zhou Dingyan was terror-stricken upon hearing this. He almost lost control of the flying sword, causing him to lose his balance and almost fall off from midair. "Su Zimo!" This was Su Zimo's voice. How was that possible? How did he manage to catch up? Zhou Dingyan's face was as white as a sheet, breaking out in cold sweats. He tried all his best to maneuver the flying sword to speed forward while he looked backward. Su Zimo was right behind him. He looked calm, as if he was just casually walking. However, every stride that he took was as far as 20 to 30 feet. He is not using his full force. At the thought of this, Zhou Dingyan seemed to have descended into an icehouse. He felt chills all over his body. Su Zimo's voice was heard again. On that night 2 years ago, you swore that even if you were lucky enough to join the immortal sect, you would never seek revenge on me. If not, you will suffer a painful death where countless of arrows pierce through your heart. Well, since that was the case, you will get what you wished for. Upon hearing this, Zhou Dingyan finally understood what the sanguine bow on the round table was meant for. Don't! Zhou Dingyan turned around quickly. He had just uttered a word and he was shrouded by a black shadow in front of him. Hoo-hoo-hoo! Dozens of arrows pierced through the air one after another. Poof! Zhou Dingyan felt pain in his chest. It was as if he had lost something in his body. He felt weak all over and he dropped from midair. Zhou Dingyan made a loud thumping sound as he flopped down onto the ground. He was covered with mud and the ground that he lay on had turned blood red. Yee! Zhou Dingyan lowered his head to look at his chest. It was a bloody mess. There was a bloody hollow as large as a bowl on his chest. His heart was pierced through and shot away by dozens of sharp arrows. Pierced through the heart by countless arrows. Everything seemed to be fated and predestined. There was a breeze in the air. Zhou Dingyan could see a corner of the fluttering green robe in front of him. Zhou Dingyan lay on the ground, looking up at Su Zimo who stood in front of him. There was a strange smile on his face as he spoke, but his words were indistinct. I am iridescent clouds. Palace, since you killed me, you won't be able to escape. One day, perfected Sang Lang will come looking for you. Su Zimo squatted down and smiled. I will go look for him before that day comes. You will be the first to go. Perfected Sang Lang will be next in line. Upon hearing this, Zhou Dingyan's head dropped to a side as he took his last breath. Su Zimo pulled the storage bag from Zhou Dingyan's waist and kept it. He then grabbed his corpse, took a few steps forward before he threw it directly into Tsanglang mountain range. It would not take a day before Zhou Dingyan's corpse was devoured by the spirit beasts. This was getting rid of the corpse to destroy the evidence of one's crime. No one would know what happened tonight. Chapter 59 The Foggy Test. Chapter 59 The Foggy Test. The reason why Su Zimo did not leave Pingyang town immediately was to wait for Zhou Dingyan. If Zhou Dingyan was to return to Pingyang town, and he could not find Su Zimo, he would definitely target the Su family instead. The imperial edict might be a deterrence to the states, but it might not be useful to Qi refinement warriors. Moreover, he was the disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace, which was one of the 5 main clans. Unless Zhou Dingyan died, Su Zimo could not leave in peace. As what Su Zimo had said to Zhou Dingyan, from the moment he let him off, he knew that Zhou Dingyan would be back. It was just that Su Zimo did not know when Zhou Dingyan would be back. But he was willing to wait. Perhaps it was because he could not ease his concern because of Zhou Dingyan, or that he had a sense of nostalgia and attachment to the mansion, the cultivation field and the particular someone. He had waited for half a year. During the past half a year, Su Zimo was not in a hurry to cultivate the 4th section, marrow cleansing of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. Instead he continued to cultivate the first 3 sections, namely, body tempering, tendons transformation and bones strengthening, to strengthen his body and to refine the essence in his body that was sealed by the scarlet flame fruit. Su Zimo had moved on to another realm. He had almost reached phenomenal success for the first 3 sections. In his spare time, Su Zimo would also practice archery in the cultivation field. It was due to his hard work in practicing archery in the past half a year that he was able to shoot dozens of arrows accurately at where the heart was. Now that he had killed Zhou Dingyan, Su Zimo no longer had any reason to stay at Pingyang town. Unexpectedly, he felt an unexplainable sense of loss. Su Zimo went back to the mansion. He stood at the door, watching the peach blossom tree not far away. His eyes were blurred, and he stood there for a long time. The dark clouds seemed to have dispersed, and the moonlight was clear as water. The petals of the peach blossoms fell off the tree. It was like that night 2 years ago, however the lady was no longer around. Su Zimo recalled a poem that he once read. Last year in this villa on the same day, on blush face the fine peach blossoms portrayed. Today, oh you're gone, my fair, but where, please? Peach blossoms are still smiling in spring breeze. When he was young, Su Zimo could not understand the artistic conception of the four-line poem. And now, Su Zimo was 19 years old. He was no longer young and inexperienced. He could finally understand the sense of sadness that one felt when things had remained the same, but people had changed. Su Zimo would never be able to forget that it was that night when he was at his lowest, feeling frustrated, lost and helpless, when a lady stood among the falling peach blossoms and brought him into the cultivation world. Su Zimo smiled. He stretched out his hands and closed the door to his mansion slowly. Now that he closed the door, Su Zimo was shutting the mansion and the very precious memory that he held dear to him, to a close as well. Only when he reunited with that person would he open the door to this memory. Su Zimo looked forward to that day. After a long time, the sky gradually brightened. Su Zimo took a deep breath, his eyes clearing up. He took out a map made of animal skin from his clothes and looked carefully at it, taking big strides towards a certain direction. A ray of light broke through the dark clouds in the sky behind him. The morning sun rose from the eastern horizon. A new day had begun. In the southwest region of the Great Zhou dynasty, there was a place in the vicinity that was very famous. There would be dense fog all year round. If one watched from afar, it was as if it was enveloped by countless unpredictable clouds. It was ethereal, and it did not seem like the mortal world. Curious men and women once went into the fog to find out what it was, but they would always end up in the same place that they started out. In the course of time, all the nearby villagers knew that this was the place where immortals resided and mortals were forbidden entry. Every year, there would be a few days whereby the villagers could vaguely see a mountain peak within the thick fog. It towered into the clouds, looking majestic and grandiose. During these few days, the nearby villagers would kneel down in the direction of the mountain peaks, praying for favorable weather and good health. This day, a green-robed scholar came to their village. It was not really accurate to call him a scholar. The man looked handsome, however there was a long saber at his waist and a sanguine bow at his back. His outfit was quite odd. The green-robed scholar was none other than Su Zimo, who had left Pingyang town. Ji Yaoshua was correct. Su Zimo had indeed thought of joining the Ethereal Peak. On one hand, since even Ji Yaoshua found that the Ethereal Peak was mysterious, it must be extraordinary. On the other hand, since the Ethereal Peak was the closest to the country of Yin, if anything happened, Su Zimo would be able to rush back as soon as possible. It was just that on the map, it only marked the approximate location of the Ethereal Peak. Once Su Zimo reached the place, he was enveloped by thick fog and he could not find its exact location. Su Zimo had walked for a day, and he always ended up at the same spot. He was clueless. Su Zimo could not see clearly in the thick fog. The visibility was low. Given his eyesight, he could only see 10 meters away. The place seemed like a maze. He kept walking in circles in the thick fog, but he could not find the exit. Weird. Su Zimo was back to the original spot again. He stared at the fog in the distance as he brooded. Ji Yaoshua once told him that if one wanted to join the Ethereal Peak, it was far more difficult than joining other sections. Other than having a high-grade spirit root, there were many tests to pass. Many high-level Qi refinement warriors could not join the Ethereal Peak as well. However, this was exactly what made the Ethereal Peak so attractive to Su Zimo. If it was like the iridescent clouds palace where they only took in disciples based on the different grades of spirit root, Su Zimo felt that this kind of sect had nothing special at all. I guess I have to put in some effort to join the Ethereal Peak. Su Zimo vaguely guessed that the thick fog in front of him might be the first test that he had to go through in order to join the Ethereal Peak. If he could not pass this test, he would not be able to see the Ethereal Peak, let alone join the clan. Seeing that it was getting late now, Su Zimo decided to find a place to rest for the night, and to think of ways to get through the maze before he decided what to do tomorrow morning. The thick fog in front of him must be there for a reason. It was useless to barge around without a plan. Not far away was a small village. A woman was preparing dinner while a strong man was chopping some wood. A hunter carried his prey on his way home, and two elders squatted at the entrance of the village, a table right in front of them, playing chess on the chessboard. Children from the village were playing and running about. This was a happy and pleasant scene. Su Zimo could feel a sense of warmth at this scene. There was a smile on his face as he took quick steps toward the village. Grandpa, I am Su Zimo, from the country of Yen. I don't have a place to stay for the night. Can I stay at your place for a night? Su Zimo reached the entrance of the village, making a bow as he asked the two elders who were playing chess. The two elders did not seem to have heard him. They were engrossed in the game, and they could not be distracted. Su Zimo coughed softly and repeated his question. The two elders still did not reply to him. They each held a chess piece, as they stared intently at the chessboard. They would make a move occasionally, looking very serious. Su Zimo felt awkward. Since the two elders did not respond, it would be rude if Su Zimo rashly entered the village. Su Zimo smiled and turned to leave. Given his abilities, he could sleep in the open. It would not be a problem to him. The reason why he wanted to stay for a night in the village was because Su Zimo could feel a sense of warmth that he had not felt for ages. Just when Su Zimo was about to leave, his eyes inadvertently rested on the chessboard of the two elders and he stopped in his tracks. This was an intense game. The two parties were in a stalemate. Even the slightest mistake in every move might cost them the game. Since Su Zimo had nothing else to do, he decided to watch them finish the game before he left. Therefore he stood by the side to watch them as they played. Fast passes and coins which were spent between 14 January 14 February 2020 will be refunded beginning February 15, 2020, taking 7 working days to be deposited. A new round of trial read selections will begin on February 15, 2020. From February 15, 2020, coins spent on books that aren't selected will be refunded within 30 days. However, fast passes will not be refunded. The selected book will have a mark on the corner of the book cover in 30 days to indicate continuation. Thank you for your understanding. Chapter 60 Breaking Through the Fog. Chapter 60 Breaking Through the Fog. After a long while, the game ended. The elder who was defeated waved his hands, disinterested, mumbling to himself. I don't feel good today. I will let you win today, let's play another game tomorrow. The elder placed his hands behind his back, with his palms facing upward, walking leisurely back to the village. The remaining elder had rosy cheeks and looked energetic. He picked up the chessboard, while looking at Su Zimo, smiling as he said, There are very few young men who are as composed as you. Let's go, follow me to the village. Thank you, Grandpa. Su Zimo smiled, expressed his gratitude and followed the elder into the village. On the way, Su Zimo passed by several villagers. They gave him a glance before returning to whatever they were doing. They did not find it odd, they seemed to have become inured to the unusual. There is no extra room here. Young man, are you okay with sleeping in the woodshed? The elder asked. I am okay with that. Su Zimo smiled as he answered. The sky had darkened and most of the villagers had yet to turn in for the night. The elders who had their dinner took leisurely strolls in the village, while the women did their needlework, mending clothes. They led a down-to-earth, simple, and peaceful life. This seemed to be a hidden land of peace and prosperity. There were no bloody fights, instead everyone seemed to carry a content smile on their faces. Su Zimo sat down at the entrance of the woodshed, watching the scene quietly. He emptied his mind of all thoughts and the fatigue he felt on the journey seemed to have lightened tremendously. The sky gradually darkened. The moon was bright and there were few stars. The elderly, the women and the men had returned to their rooms to rest, except for some energetic and bubbly children who were still playing around on the street, refusing to go home to sleep. Su Zimo stood up, returned to the woodshed and closed the door, getting ready to sleep. Just then, he heard the bright and sweet voice of a young child coming from the village. Where shall one find the traces of the immortal? Looking far into the distance of the ethereal peak, it was deep in the mountains where the thick clouds were. Su Zimo had an idea. He turned, pushed the door open and went in the direction of the voice. Not far away was a 7 or 8-year-old child. The child smiled and jumped, moving in his direction. Su Zimo thought for a while before he walked forward. He squatted and asked with a smile on his face. Young child, you were saying something just now. Whom did you hear it from? Who said it? The child bent their head to the side and blinked, looking confused. I have no idea. But all of us know it. Is it just a nursery rhyme? Su Zimo mused. Big brother, are you interested in immortal cultivation? The child continued to ask. Yes. Su Zimo nodded and smiled. How do you know? There was a flicker of craftiness in the child's eyes. The child stuck out the tongue. Every year there will be many people like you. But most of them won't get to see the immortals. Ha! What should I do to see them? Su Zimo was interested, feeling like teasing the child. I don't know as well. The child pouted their lips and shook their head. Su Zimo smiled faintly. He was just about to stand up to leave when a thought flashed across his mind. He asked the child. Where shall one find the traces of the immortal? Looking far into the distance of the ethereal peak. However, the ethereal peak is covered by thick fog. How can one be able to see it? This is easy. The child raised the chin, feeling proud. The fog will gradually disperse a few days later. If you stand here, one can vaguely see the mountain peak. However, it will only last for 3 days. If you miss it, you won't be able to see it. Su Zimo was elated. As long as he could see the ethereal peak, and moved forward in its direction, he would definitely be able to reach the foot of the mountain. Su Zimo certainly did not think that he only needed to pass through the thick fog to be able to join the ethereal peak. This was just the beginning. Su Zimo stayed in the village for 7 days. On the 7th day, the thick fog gradually dispersed, and he could vaguely see a majestic and towering mountain looming in the distant clouds. Su Zimo bade farewell to everyone in the village and stepped into the thick fog once again. In the thick fog, all the senses had been dulled and one could not have a good sense of direction. Su Zimo felt that after turning eastward and westward, he seemed to be retracing his steps at times. As the thick fog gradually dispersed, he could tell the exact location of the peak in the far distance despite being shrouded in fog. Su Zimo threw caution to the wind and tried to ignore the wrong impression he had because of his senses, moving forward according to the location of the mountain peak. All of a sudden, gurgling sounds could be heard coming from deep in the fog. It was frightening and eerie. It seemed as if spirit beasts were moving about, stepping on the grass. It was getting closer and closer. A faint bloody smell wafted over him. Su Zimo squinted and stopped, looking in the direction where the sound came from. He waited for a long time, but he did not see any spirit beast. It was a strange feeling. Su Zimo did not sense any danger with his spirit perception. However, he had indeed heard the sounds made by the spirit beast and detected its aura coming from that direction. Su Zimo spent 1 year in Songlang mountain range. The smell was too familiar. He would never be mistaken about it. Weird. Su Zimo murmured and continued to move forward. Roar! Soon after, there was a loud tiger growl. It was deafening and it had a formidable aura. It proved that the spirit beast was very powerful. It could even be of the same level as a spirit demon. Su Zimo frowned. Logically speaking, if there was a powerful spirit beast or spirit demon in front of him, Su Zimo should be able to sense the danger with his spirit perception. However, strangely his spirit perception could not detect anything, while his senses kept telling him that there was danger. In this case, there could only be 2 possibilities. The surrounding fog had shrouded Su Zimo's spirit perception, or that it had confused his 5 senses. The answer was obvious. These methods were meant to scare off those who wanted to take the path of immortal cultivation or those who were weak-minded. The tiger growl and the bloody smell were just methods to deceive people. After figuring out the purpose of the thick fog, Su Zimo smiled and ignored all the sounds that he heard from the surroundings, walking deeper into the fog without any care. Nevertheless, it was a brilliant move to make use of the thick fog to confuse one's senses. If Su Zimo did not have spirit perception, he would be trembling in fear and taking careful steps along the way. Su Zimo gradually sped up and he walked out of the thick fog in no time. Everything became clear in front of him. As far as the eyes could see, there were verdant and lush vegetation, clear waters and green hills. It was full of vitality. He felt as if he was in the immortal world. There was a stone gate not too far away. At the back of the stone gate was a mountain road that was paved with green stones. The path winded around the mountain and led all the way to the deep, dark end of the fog. On the two sides of the stone gate stood two young smart-looking children who cultivated Tao. One of them was plump while the other was thin. At the sight of Su Zimo, the plump child smiled and nodded. "Young master, you are the first to reach. Please wait here. We will only open the gate and accept disciples 3 days later." Su Zimo was not in a hurry. He waited by the side silently. Many people kept coming out from the fog. Most of them were mortals who had not been cultivating. They looked pale and beads of perspiration could be seen on their forehead. It seemed that they were scared stiff during the journey. Some of them were Chi Refinement warriors who maneuvered flying swords to break out of the fog. They breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing the stone gate. A few Chi Refinement warriors swept their gaze over Su Zimo. They relaxed slightly upon knowing that he had no spirit chi. Some Chi Refinement warriors took a glance at the bow and saber that Su Zimo had with him, and sneered. They could not help but smirk. There were people from all walks of life. 3 days passed in no time. Fast passes and coins which were spent between 14 January 14 February 2020 will be refunded beginning February 15, 2020, taking 7 working days to be deposited. A new round of trial read selections will begin on February 15, 2020. From February 15, 2020, coins spent on books that aren't selected will be refunded within 30 days. However, fast passes will not be refunded. The selected book will have a mark on the corner of the book cover in 30 days to indicate continuation. Thank you for your understanding. Chapter 61 Spirit Testing Stage. Chapter 61 Spirit Testing Stage. Within 3 days, more than 500 people had gathered before the stone gate. Most of them were mortals who had not cultivated before, and there were a couple dozens of Chi Refinement warriors. Once the 3 days had passed, the fog behind them turned murkier and impenetrable. Even if anyone outside wanted to join Ethereal Peak, they could only wait for the next year by now. Notwithstanding the 500-odd people waiting outside the stone gate, even the 2 children could not really conceal their fatigue after the 3 days as they stood there chatting idly. "Senior brother, how many of these people do you think can get to join the sect?" "5 at most." Through that vast forest, the sound of birds singing and running water was all around. As such, the discussion of the 2 children was almost like mosquito buzzing and no one could hear them. Yet, within the crowd, a bow and saber-carrying scholar frowned as a look of shock flashed through his eyes. Cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness did not merely change one's body. The body-tempering aspect would heighten their sense of smell, the tendons transformation aspect their sense of vision, and the bones strengthening aspect their hearing. The changes were all-encompassing. Even though Su Zimo was of the human race, his physical body and 5 senses were even sharper than those of spirit beasts. Despite the soft voices of the 2 children, Su Zimo heard everything clear as day. Only 5 out of the 500 of them could be accepted into the sect. That was a ratio of 1 to 100. How could anyone imagine that? Su Zimo had initially thought that he would be able to enter Ethereal Peak with ease with his borrowed heaven spirit root. But now, it seemed like he couldn't just rely on that. The conditions for one to be able to join Ethereal Peak must be extremely stringent, or there wouldn't be so many people eliminated. Just as Su Zimo was contemplating on what he should do, he heard the 2 children continue. "Who do you think stands a greater chance, senior brother?" The couple that doesn't really seem to fit in. Even though they're only at level 5 Qi condensation, they look like they have an extraordinary aura. They're decent. Oh, that little fatty too. He looks rather sharp, so he should be fine. Junior brother, he's even fatter than you. Hee hee. Su Zimo swept his gaze at him. Amongst the crowd, a man and woman stood by their own somewhere slightly further, not fitting in with the crowd. Su Zimo was around the same age as the man who wore a purple robe with sharp brows and an edged chin. He looked haughty as his hands rested behind his back with eyes closed, standing still. It looked as though he was one with the environment. The woman was wearing a flawless white blouse and looked beautiful like a fairy. Yet, her ravishing looks carried a cold expression where one could sense from a distance away. Su Zimo had a feeling that the reason why the man did not want to fit in was out of disdain, and the woman merely did not want to. As for the little fatty, to be exact, he was not little at all and looked to be around 16 years old. His neck and waist could not be made out, and he merely resembled a water bucket that had 2 elephant legs as he rolled about the crowd without stopping. His rotund face carried small beady eyes that fluttered about. In just 3 days, he was already one with the crowd. Senior brother, what about that bow and saber-carrying scholar? Do you think he has a chance? The fat child asked. Su Zimo was curious when he heard the conversation being steered to him, intrigued to find out what the skinny child thought of him. That man is a little strange. Even though he's a scholar, he's carrying a huge bow and saber. I suspect that there must be more to his weapons. Right then, a gentle ray of sun shone through the greenery. The sun had risen. Arranging their attire, the 2 children stood on either side of the stone gate with a stern expression. The skinny child spoke. Ethereal Peak's disciple acceptance consists of 3 stages. First is the immortal affinity stage. There is a certain affinity required for one to attain immortality. I believe that all of you have that for being able to make it through the mist here. The second stage is the spirit testing stage. Those with a superior class spirit root, earth spirit root or heaven spirit root will be able to make it to the 3rd stage once they pass through this gate. The 3rd stage is called the life and death stage. Those who the 2nd stage can head up the stone steps behind me and you'll pass once you reach the peak. But let me remind you guys, this is an extremely treacherous peak. Any misstep and you'll fall to your death without a corpse. Please do be careful and not force yourselves. At that thought, everyone felt their hearts skip a beat as they all looked unnerved. The reason why they wanted to join Ethereal Peak was because they wanted to attain immortality. If they were to lose their lives joining the sect, how could they achieve immortality? The tip of the peak was shrouded in clouds and could not be seen. It was clear that the path would not be that easy to climb. The dozens of Qi Refinement warriors present smiled, looking confident. All of them could tread the skies with their swords. Climbing the peak posed no challenge to them at all. Amongst the group, one of the mortals was dissident as he yelled, "How is this fair? All of those Qi Refinement warriors can easily fly their way to the peak, but we have to climb it step by step." Humph! One of the Qi Refinement warriors harumphed coldly and scoffed. There's nothing such as fairness in this world. If you want to speak of fairness, come to me after you achieve Qi condensation. You! The mortal was speechless and indignant. The 2 children of the ethereal sect were not annoyed in the slightest as the fat one chuckled. Everyone, you're overthinking it. The path is definitely fair for everyone. Even Qi Refinement warriors will not, may not be able to reach the peak. If they're not careful, they'll end up losing their lives as well. As though he was about to let something slip, the fat child looked flustered for a moment as he changed his statement. Most people merely thought that the fat child had said something wrong by accident. At that reply, many of the mortals present heaved a sigh of relief. However, the dozens of Qi Refinement warriors looked terrible. They had cultivated earnestly with some of them even at level 9 Qi condensation. If they were to die here just because they wanted to join a sect. Su Zimo glanced sideways. The purple-robed haughty man still had his eyes closed as though he was indifferent to what the 2 children had said. The white-bloused woman maintained her cold expression with an unyielding gaze that seemed to be frozen. The little fatty among the crowd was still laughing and looking nonchalant. "Come, the first person." The skinny child raised his hand and indicated for the first person to enter the stone gate. It was a level 7 Chi Refinement warrior. The man was somewhat nervous as he paused before the stone gate. Bowing to the two children, he smiled and asked, "Fellow Taoists, can an ordinary spirit root work? Is there any leeway?" The two children shook their heads. Sighing, the man walked towards the stone gate. The moment he reached the stone gate, a water barrier appeared across it with 4 shimmering lights. For elements, it was an ordinary spirit root. The man tried his best to barge through the stone gate, but he was blocked by the water barrier. In the blink of an eye, he was bounced back from it. Failure! The fat child looked apologetic as he nodded to the man before raising his voice to the crowd. Next! Chapter 62 Variant Spirit Root. Chapter 62 Variant Spirit Root. Pseudo-Spirit Root fail. Ordinary Spirit Root fail. Superior Class Spirit Root pass. Everyone continued proceeding to the stone gate where more than half of them were rejected. Only those with a superior class and above Spirit Root could get to past the spirit testing stage. In the blink of an eye, there were only a couple dozens of people left with the haughty man, the white-bloused woman, the little fatty and Su Zimo. There had yet to be a single heaven spirit root amongst the tested yet. There were tens of earth spirit roots and the rest were all superior class. The two children could not hide their looks of disappointment as they placed their remaining hope in the last dozens of people. Right then, the little fatty walked through the stone gate all smiles. The moment he reached the stone gate, a roaring sound rang out, scaring everyone. Bang! Boom! Boom! The water barrier turned yellow right away before materializing slowly into a sturdy mud wall. Earth element, heaven spirit root. Out of the 500 over applicants, there was finally a heaven spirit root. The two children nodded to the little fatty with a kind smile, their eyes sparkling. As he crossed the stone gate with ease, he came to the two children with smiles and pulled their hands together like long-lost friends. Casually, he started engaging the both of them in conversation. Both of them were a little stunned and they nearly spilled everything about themselves within a few mere sentences. At that sight, Su Zimo smirked internally. That little fatty looked to be amiable and cute from the outside, but her was sharper than any of them. Before long, the skinny child was the first one to recover as he coughed gently and swung the little fatty's chubby hand away and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, please respect yourself and wait at the side instead of distracting us." Yes, yes. Self-respect. I understand that I've got a huge self to respect. The little fatty giggled without looking awkward at all. The skinny child rolled his eyes and got rid of the little fatty before yelling toward the stone gate. Next! Someone tried and failed once more. The number of people remaining was diminishing. Finally, the haughty man opened his eyes as he turned to look at the white-bloused woman not too far away. Giving a slight grin, he headed for the stone gate. His actions attracted everyone's attention. It was as though he was a born ruler where every single move he made would attract the gazes of the masses. The little fatty stopped smiling and looked at the stone gate. Frowning slightly, the white-bloused woman raised her head and her eyes followed the haughty man coldly too. The haughty man stopped himself before the stone gate where the water barrier showed no indication of color. Hee hee. After a temporary silence, giggles spread from the crowd. What's he putting a show on for when he doesn't even have a spirit root? I know, right? And here I was thinking that he was someone incredible. Wait, something's not right. How did he become a Chi Refinement warrior without a spirit root? The moment that sentence was spoken, everyone fell silent. It was as though an invisible hand had gripped the covered the mouths of the mocking crowd as they watched with agape eyes. The two children had a stern expression as well. The little fatty was in deep thoughts. As though he had realized something, his chubby body shivered slightly as he could not contain his shock. Ooh! Ooh! Right then, a bizarre howling sound came out of the stone gate as the water barrier shimmered, looking like a breeze had just passed through it. Wind element, variant spirit root! The two children yelped. When he heard that, Suzimo's heart skipped a beat too. Of the 5 types of spirit roots, the heaven spirit root was the best and rarest. However, there was a single spirit root that was even rarer than that, the variant spirit root, containing elements such as wind, thunder, ice, light and darkness, etc. One could say that a heaven spirit root could only be found in 1 out of 10,000 men. Yet, a variant spirit root was 10-fold rarer than that. Naturally, a variant spirit root only had a single element as well and was a type of heaven spirit root. However, that did not mean that it was stronger than the usual 5 elements. It was just extremely rare. The haughty man smiled and crossed the stone gate with ease. Excitedly, the skinny child whispered, "Junior brother, stand guard over here. I'll go inform the peak master and be right back." "Yes, yes. Hurry on, senior brother," the fat child replied hastily. Right then, the white-bloused woman outside the stone gate moved as well. "Hold on, senior brother. We can wait till this one's done too," the fat Dao child called back the skinny one. Nodding his head, the skinny child watched the white-bloused woman keenly, seemingly even more nervous than her. When she arrived before the stone gate, there was no color on the water barrier still. This time round, no one dared to mock anymore. Could it be another variant spirit root? The eyes of both children widened in disbelief. Everyone else watched the stone gate with bated breath. Crack! 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 Suddenly, a layer of frost covered the water barrier before freezing it into ice. "Ice element, variant spirit root!" Everyone gasped. It's been tens of years since a variant spirit root has appeared at Ethereal Peak. But now there's 2 in one go? No, I've got to hurry and report it to the peak master. The skinny child drew out a flying sword and sped towards the back of the peak, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Everyone else watched the haughty man and the white-bloused woman with looks of admiration and respect. The little fatty smiled his way to the white-bloused woman before pandering to her. "Miss, you're so beautiful. I've never seen a woman as beautiful as you in my life. You're even prettier than our village beauty, Sister Kai Feng." It was as though thunder had struck everyone present as they rolled their eyes. That little fatty really did dare to say anything with drivel such as his village beauty, Sister Kai Feng and whatnot. He wasn't wrong in his words. The white-bloused woman was indeed extremely beautiful. However, most people would not dare to spout such truths, let alone in front of her. Yet the strange thing was that everything seemed natural and sincere when they came out of the little fatty's mouth without a single bit of awkwardness. If any other women heard such an open and brazen compliment, they would definitely feel shy. However, the girl was unmoved as she glared at the little fatty coldly without saying anything. The little fatty wasn't dissuaded as he slipped away to the haughty man's side before commenting in awe. "Sir, you have such a good figure. I'm really envious. Get away!" The haughty man's lips pursed slightly as he spat out those 2 words. "Ah, all right." The little fatty nodded his head keenly as he disregarded cleanliness, and rolled away on the floor immediately. Because his figure resembled a ball to begin with, his rolling motion indeed made him look less than human. The white-bloused woman's lips twitched as her frostiness diminished slightly, watching with a trace of bemusement. Spying her expression with his sharp eyes, the little fatty stumbled over to the white-bloused woman's side with an intoxicated expression. His eyes seemed as though they were sparkling as he praised. "Wow, you really look so beautiful smiling." Instantly, the friendliness in the girl's eyes disappeared. However, she stretched out her delicate hand and patted on the little fatty's head, neither harshly nor gently. Smiling with squinted eyes, the little fatty looked to be enjoying it. How could there be someone this shameless? Those were the words that passed through everyone's minds. When the fat child looked at the remaining tens of people and saw nothing special about them, he waved his hand patiently and demanded, "Continue with the test. Hurry up." Suzimo tidied his clothes before heading up. Chapter 63 Exploded? Chapter 63 Exploded? Su Zimo's actions did not attract anyone's attention. Compared to the haughty man, white-bloused woman and little fatty, he seemed simply way too ordinary apart from his slightly weird dressing. The reason why Su Zimo waited for the end of the test wasn't because he wanted to pull a surprise on everyone. It was because he had no spirit root to begin with. Even though Dai Yu had planted the spirit root for him, he could not help but feel nervous as to whether things would turn out well. Standing still before the stone gate, he watched the water barrier keenly. Swoosh! A red flash of light shimmered through the water barrier before burning into raging flames, exuding a scorching warmth. Su Zimo was elated. Fire element, heaven's spirit root. Apart from the haughty man and white-bloused woman, everyone turned their sights to him. Out of the 500 people, other than the 2 variant spirit roots, the little fatty was the only earth element heaven spirit root. Now that Su Zimo was the second, he naturally attracted everyone's attention. Furthermore, those with some knowledge on cultivation knew that a fire spirit root was superior to an earth spirit root. On the one hand, the fire element had the highest killing power amongst the 5 elements. On the other hand, one who possessed the fire element had the chance to become a weapon or elixir refinement master. Those 2 paths required one to have a high mastery and understanding of the fire element. As such, those with a fire spirit root had an innate advantage. Waiting with a hawk-eye by the stone gate, the little fatty was hoping to make his acquaintance as well after Su Zimo passed through it. Eh? The fat Dao child was standing at the side idly as he let out a casual surprised remark. Smiling, he then nodded and said, "Not bad, not bad. Come on over, sir." After all, the fat child had his fill of surprises after the appearance of 2 consecutive variant spirit roots, and hence the reason for his less than enthused response. Right then, no one had noticed anything strange about Su Zimo just yet. He stood before the stone gate motionlessly instead of crossing right away. It wasn't that he did not want to, the stone gate was stopping him. He could feel a strong resistance that was trying to keep him out of the gate. In theory, the water barrier would only block out those without or those who possess a pseudo and ordinary spirit root. Yet, the scarlet water barrier was resisting Su Zimo, who clearly possessed a heaven spirit root. If not for the fact that he had an extremely strong physique, he would have been sent flying like the first G refinement warrior. How could this be? Su Zimo strategized as he fought against the resistance of the water barrier. He knew his background clearer than anyone else. He was someone without a spirit root to begin with. It was only natural for the stone gate to resist him at that thought. But what was up with the clear indication of his fire spirit root? If he were to continue with this stalemate, notwithstanding the fat child of Ethereal sect, even everyone else would realize that something was wrong and Su Zimo's efforts would have been wasted. Indignant. Su Zimo was indignant. Why? He had already come so far just to be stopped by a single stone gate. With a darkened expression, he moved towards the water barrier and took a fierce step. Su Zimo had already displayed the stance for the plow heaven stride with his single step. Instantly, he gave off such a menacing aura that even the fat child at the stone gate jumped in shock. As though he had sensed something, the haughty man opened his eyes and looked towards the stone gate. Turning her head slightly, the white-bloused woman frowned gently too. Everyone found themselves witnessing the strangest scene ever. Even though Su Zimo was almost entirely through the stone gate, the scarlet water barrier did not dissipate at all. Instead, it wrapped around him like an elastic veil that was trying its best to stop him. It stunned everyone present. What was going on? Fire element, heaven's spirit root. That's right. But why would the stone gate try to prevent this man? It was a wrestle between Su Zimo and the scarlet water barrier. All of a sudden, squinting his eyes, Su Zimo's body rang out with crackling sounds and his entire body seemed as though it had enlarged. With his tendons and bones cracking together, he gave a soft yell and strode out once more. Swoosh! The water barrier shattered and fell to the ground. Having successfully passed the stone gate, Suzumo's expression relaxed as he heaved out a sigh of relief before walking to the fat child. Right as he was about to speak, he saw a weird look in the fat child's eye as the latter glared behind him intently. Snap! Suddenly, a boom sounded out from behind Suzumo. He turned around instinctively only to witness a fissure forming on the crossbeam of the mighty 30-foot stone gate. Crack! 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 Before anyone realized what was going on, the fissure spread out swiftly and in the blink of an eye, filled the entire stone gate with dense, horrifying cracks. Suzumo's heart skipped a beat. Bang! Boom! Boom! Along with a huge crash, the stone gate crumbled right before everyone's eyes just like that, turning into a pile of rocks with dust clouds flying about. What followed was a deathly silence. Everyone's faces froze right away. The haughty man scowled while a look of surprise filled the white-bloused woman's face as her mouth gaped slightly, losing her previous demeanor. The little fatty was so rattled that his eyeballs were almost popping out. "Ye exploded?" The fat child was completely lost as his mind and eyes went blank. It was already phenomenal enough for variant spirit roots to make their appearance in the test such that his senior brother had gone off to inform their peak master about it. But what was up with this scholar before him? He had caused the entire stone gate to explode with a simple spirit root test. Unnerved, Suzumo coughed gently before revealing a friendly smile to the fat child. "Fellow Taoist, I suppose that stone gate must be really old, huh?" "Ah! Yes," the fat child replied automatically. "It's been a couple thousand years now." "That must be it then." Suzumo nodded his head and continued solemnly. "It's only natural for problems to arise since the gate has been here for such a long time, enduring the weather all round the year. How unfortunate that I had to come across its demise." "Huh!" The fat child's jaw almost dropped to the ground. Suzumo patted the fat child on the shoulder and reminded sincerely. "This may not be a bad thing, though. At least, it serves as a reminder for the sect to conduct constant maintenance to some of the older structures you guys have so that today's situation does not repeat itself. These issues have to be nipped in the bud before they are allowed to manifest." The fat child was befuddled to begin with through the confusion. With Suzumo's explanation, he was even more astounded and was almost convinced. In reality, the stone gate was initially a gigantic spirit testing stone with its middle dug out by the cultivators of Ethereal sect and placed here, turning into the stone gate they perceive today. The spirit testing stone was a spirit item of the universe and was extremely perceptive to spirit roots. There was no way it would be destroyed through a lack of maintenance. If no one had destroyed it, it could have lasted for even millions of years without any issues. The little fatty was the first to react as his eyes flickered, glancing at Suzumo while raising a thumbs up. He knew that he was not at Suzumo's level where the latter could spout nonsense with a straight face. As such, he could not help but feel impressed. Suzumo could not help but feel guilty. Everything had gone beyond his expectations. Even though what he said was akin to duping kids, it was better than having his background exposed. Chapter 64 Life and Death Stage. Chapter 64 Life and Death Stage. The fat child was thoroughly confused by Suzumo as he froze for a long time without understanding what had happened, pointing at Suzumo and stammering. Why you? I'll go let the peak master know about this too." Shrugging his head as though trying to clear his mind, the fat child patted his storage bag and summoned a flying sword before speeding to the back of the peak. In the blink of an eye, both children guarding this place had disappeared. Unnerved, the fat child had left in a hurry without saying anything else. The little fatty seemed to be extremely interested in Suzumo. With bright, shimmering eyes, he stumbled over and bowed. "Sir, how did you do it? Can you teach me?" With an unchanging expression, Suzumo shook his head. "That has nothing to do with me." Even though he said that, his heart whispered another tune. There were only two reasons why the stone gate blocked him. First, it was because he was a cultivator without a spirit root to begin with. Second, even though it was also a heaven spirit root, the fire spirit root that dye you gave him was different from normal ones. Su Zimo could not tell which of the two reasons it was. After the spirit testing stage, there were only 80 out of the 500 left with more than 20 Chi refinement warriors. Based on the order of events, the remaining 80 people should head up the peak through the path beyond the stone gate so that they could proceed with the third stage, life and death. However, with the 2 children from Ethereal sect gone, everyone was lost as to whether they should continue with the original plan or wait where they were. Right then, the haughty man chuckled and started ascending the peak. His actions caused everyone to waver. The 2 children had mentioned earlier that the third stage was merely to head up the peak through the path. However, everyone knew that if they could be the first to reach the peak, their chances of being accepted would be much higher. After the haughty man, the white-bloused woman made her move too. Exchanging glances, everyone else followed suit immediately. The path was made from green stones and was neither rugged nor tough. Instead, the journey was picturesque with luscious greenery and the soothing melody of birds singing. As they traversed through the clouds with the accompanying scenery, it was as though they were in paradise. Everything felt relaxing, unlike a treacherous life and death stage. Su Zimo was in no hurry as he hung around at the back of the pack. He felt that since Ethereal sex at this stage, it wouldn't be to give the first person who reached the peak an advantage. It was way too cliché and wasn't a fair method given the number of people present. Finally, if it was that simple, it wouldn't be named life and death stage. After Su Zimo destroyed the entire stone gate for a mere test, the little fatty was now hanging around him instead of the haughty man and the white-bloused woman, chatting non-stop the entire way. Worried that he may let his background slip, Su Zimo was rather distracted as he only replied casually every now and then. Bro, everyone went through this spirit root testing so ordinarily. But your test was like a fart to Mother Nature. Why do you say that? Because it was loud and clear. Bro, you seem like you have a dignified demeanor. I suppose you have quite the extraordinary background? I've studied for a couple of years in the past. My bro! That's like a rare gem in the crowd. You can both study and fight. Su Zimo finally understood the powers of the little fatty as he hurried ahead, wanting to bury himself into the crowd. Right then, the people up ahead stopped in their tracks. Su Zimo looked up and frowned. That was the end of the mountain path. Everyone found themselves facing a steep peak that extended into the clouds boundlessly. The true test had arrived. The smooth mountain road was merely a warm-up. The many mortals present looked up at the peak solemnly. For them, the only way they could reach the top was to climb by hand. However, the peak was simply way too steep that there was barely any edge for them to grab onto. On both sides of the mountain road was a deep abyss where a single misstep would mean certain death. Everyone could not help but recall the words of the children. This was a stage treacherous like no other. Any single mistake and they would find themselves dead without a corpse. Hence, they should be careful and not force themselves. Many of the mortals could not hide their fear in their expression as they gave up internally. There were some who were indignant about things and whispered in discussion. Ethereal sect is way too much. They're trying to get us killed just to join them. Isn't that right? It's not as though our spirit root is lousy as well. If push comes to shove, we can just join some other sections. That would be better than dying here. I don't even know how high this peak is. What if we climb halfway up and run out of energy? Unlike the many mortals, the 20-odd Chi refinement warriors present looked relaxed. While this mountain may seem insurmountable to mortals, all they had to do was ride their flying swords and rise endlessly. One of the Chi refinement warriors pulled out a flying sword from his storage bag and with a single leap, he chuckled with a suave expression. All right, I'll make a move first and await you guys at the peak. Right after, he soared into the skies and disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye. Not willing to lose out, the other Chi refinement warriors took out their spirit weapons and followed suit. Yet, the strange thing was that the haughty man did not move at all. Instead, he frowned and gazed into the clouds, contemplating about something. It was the same for the white-bloused woman as she stood there in deep thoughts. Some of the mortals gathered their courage and began climbing the peak. Compared to the Chi refinement warriors, They were much slower, and every single step was horrifying. A single misstep and they would fall right into the abyss. "Bro, aren't you moving?" The little fatty looked at Suzimo. Right as he was about to reply, a shriek rang out from the clouds. Ah! Everyone's heart skipped a beat. In the blink of an eye, a shadow fell from the clouds and glided through everyone's vision into the dark abyss beneath. At that sight, everyone's expressions turned grim as chills ran down their spines. The person who had fallen was the Chi Refinement warrior who had moved first. A Chi Refinement warrior was dead just like that? What had he encountered up there? The clouds rumbled and shifted, emanating a chilling killing intent. Ah! It was yet another shriek. A shadow fluttered by them and dunked into the depths of the abyss. Gulp, gulp. The place rang out with everyone's gulping sounds. In just a mere short while, 2 Chi Refinement warriors had fallen to their deaths. The 2 children were right. The third stage was fair for everyone, such that even Chi Refinement warriors may not be able to reach the peak. The few mortals that had just started climbing up the peak found themselves getting cold feet as they watched everything unfold in utter horror. There were already people who had started to climb down. What kind of a joke was that? There was no need for them to take such a risk when even Chi Refinement warriors have died. Suddenly, the haughty man laughed and mumbled. "Life and death stage, life and death stage. The peak represents life while the abyss represents death. Interesting. Challenging." Chapter 65 Crane Obstacle. Chapter 65 Crane Obstacle. The way most of them looked at the haughty man had changed. While everyone else was scared to death and wanted to back off, he was the only one who looked raring to go without a single bit of fear. Ah! Ah! Yet another chain of shrieks as the Chi Refinement warriors who had moved ahead first fell from the clouds one after another, disappearing into the abyss on either side of the mountain path. Finally, there were people who could take it no longer as they started backtracking. The little fatty held his tongue and exclaimed, "Even a level 9 Chi Refinement warrior fell down. Just what did they encounter in the clouds?" Suzimo saw everything even clearer. There were a total of 23 Chi Refinement warriors who soared into the skies. In the blink of an eye, every single one of them had fallen. That was a little horrifying. Many mortals started climbing down the walls, looking terrified with trembling feet. Without even turning back, they dashed down the mountain path. There were more than 80 people who had passed the second stage. Now, all the 23 Chi Refinement warriors have already failed. Coupled with the mortals who had left, there were only 17 people left at the base of the peak. All of the 17 were resolute warriors who did not show the slightest look of fear in their eyes even at the sight of all those Chi Refinement warriors falling over. Even the little fatty who was chattering the entire way merrily had gone silent, his beady eyes fluttering about as he was deep in thoughts. Suzimo had always felt something unusual about this stage as everything seemed suspicious. However, he could not point out just what exactly was wrong. At almost the same time, both the haughty man and white-bloused woman summoned a flying sword and soared to the skies. However, their speed was clearly slower. It was clear that both of them were being wary about the situation as well. "Bro, remember to be careful. I'll scout the way for you first." The little fatty was also a Chi Refinement warrior, as he retrieved a small shield from his storage bag. The shield expanded with the wind and carried his rotund body into the skies slowly. The remaining 14 people inclusive of Suzimo were mortals who had no spirit chi within them. If they wanted to ascend the peak, they would have to climb the peak step by step physically. Suzimo hesitated no more as he approached the base of the peak. With a nimble leap, he hung onto the walls and started climbing up swiftly. That shocked the remaining 13 people as they almost mistook him for a monkey instead of a human climbing the peak. By now, Suzimo had almost perfected his tendons transformation. He was nimble like a python and agile like an ape. Moving with ease, the peak posed no challenge to him at all. Apes were natural-born climbers. If Suzimo had given it his all, even Chi Refinement warriors who could soar through the skies may not even be able to match his speed. Previously at the Tianhuang mountain range, even when Elder Qian of Joyful Clan soared through the skies, Su Zimo's speed while climbing the towering old tree matched his. Of course, Su Zimo had used his sanguine ape transformation at that time, and Elder Qian was only a foundation establishment cultivator. Even without using all his strength, Su Zimo had left the 13 remaining mortals far behind his tail. Caw, caw! Right then, Su Zimo vaguely picked up on some birds crying out. Even though he had lived a year in Tianhuang mountain range, he still could not understand the language of beasts. However, he could tell of how they felt through their sounds. Those birds clearly sounded happy and mocking. Why are there spirit beasts here? He frowned as he continued climbing without slowing down at all. Bastard, how dare you! Before long, the voice of the haughty man hollered out above. Su Zimo raised his head and gazed over, squinting his eyes. Far beyond the clouds, a gigantic bird was extending its wings while cawing out with a raised head. Su Zimo could faintly make out the bird assaulting the haughty man, white-bloused woman and little fatty in midair. Every single gentle flap of its wings brought about a hurricane, as all three of them swayed back and forth midair, looking as though they could fall any time. A spirit demon? Su Zimo was stunned. The bird exuded an aura that was the same as spirit demons. It looked as though it had just become a spirit demon, equivalent to a foundation establishment cultivator. Even then, its strength was enough to hold out against the three of them. It was clear that the bird had not used its full strength. Instead, it was running circles around the three of them like a cat circling a rat, flapping its wings from time to time so that none of them could ascend further. The haughty man had a wind spirit root to begin with, and thus was barely able to maintain his balance despite swaying in the wind. The white-bloused woman had a frozen expression. She was encased by a transparent ice barrier. It was clear that she had already used the talisman. As for the little fatty, his shield was steady and spacious. He sprawled on it, gripping onto its edges tightly with sweat pouring down his puffy face, looking all nervous. So, this is the obstacle of the life and death stage. One would be able to reach the peak if they could get through this bird. Now that he understood the reason, Su Zimo was prepared to continue climbing. Right then, the little fatty shrieked. Perhaps because the bird saw that Su Zimo and the others were approaching as well, it seemed as though it no longer wanted to waste time as it flapped its wings furiously. The little fatty was the first one to lose control as he fell from midair with his shield blown into oblivion. Ah! His face was pale as a sheet as he flailed his arms, crying out loudly. When he caught sight of Su Zimo above him, he called, "Bro, run! There's a fierce bird up there." The place where the little fatty fell was not too far away from Su Zimo. Su Zimo had a decent impression of the little fatty and was not about to leave the ladder in the lurch. With a swift motion, he strode horizontally across the wall and grabbed the little fatty from midair. By then, the little fatty's eyes were rolled over while he drooled all over, seemingly passed out of fear. Su Zimo frowned. He was already halfway through the climb. If he were to put the little fatty down, he would have to repeat an entire journey once more. Even though the little fatty was heavy, he was nothing compared to the cold moon's saber and sanguine crystal bow hanging on his waist. At that thought, Su Zimo grabbed the little fatty with one arm while continuing to climb with another without slowing down at all. It was only after he got closer that he managed to make things out clearly. It was a crane that looked to be in its infancy stage, its eyes filled with merry excitement. It was as though making the climbers fall was the most fun game it ever played. Swooping down, the crane extended its claws and landed on the white-bloused woman's talisman ice barrier. Crack! Crack! The barrier began cracking as the crane clawed at it with ease. With a strong gust of wind, the woman then fell from her sword. Even though her gaze looked slightly dim, she did not make a single peep of disgruntlement as she disappeared into the abyss. The haughty man followed soon after, holding out for not much longer under the attacks of the crane as he fell through the skies looking indignant. Caw, caw! Rearing its head, the crane looked extremely gleeful. Chapter 66 and 8. Chapter 66 and 8. When he saw the haughty man and white-bloused woman falling into the abyss, Suzimo was finally clear about one thing. Those that fall into the abyss will definitely not die. Since the two of them possessed a variant spirit root, and the peak master of Ethereal Peak already knew about it, there was no way they would be allowed to die. However, Suzimo did not know what those who fell into the abyss would encounter. Shifting horizontally, Suzimo dodged from the crane's line of sight and continued speeding up the peak. Even though he only had one hand, his feet were as nimble as his fingers after he removed his shoes. Digging themselves into the wall of the peak, he continued climbing steadily. The crane had extremely sharp senses. With a swift flap, it appeared above Suzimo's head and cried out, looking at him with a taunting expression as though mocking his little play of trying to dodge it. The man and crane had finally met. On a peak enshrouded with spirit chi elsewhere, two grace middle-aged cultivators sat opposite to one another. They were both clad in white robes, and one of them had a flying sword emblem engraved on his sleeve while the other had a hexagon emblem. Both of them were sipping tea lazily. Beside them stood a skinny child who was relating something excitedly. Variant spirit root? Two of them? One of them placed his teacup down and turned around to ask, his expression slightly changed. The skinny child nodded furiously. The other cultivator asked, "What spirit roots were they?" "One is wind and the other is ice." At that, the two cultivators exchanged glances and smiled, apparently pleased. "When Xian, your peak's about to produce two more geniuses." There were 6 peaks to Ethereal Peak, where the highest amongst them was the true Ethereal Peak that was visible to the outside world. Surrounding it were 5 other peaks: Spirit, Elixir, Talisman, Array and Weapon. The cultivator known as Wenxian, the one with a flying sword emblem embossed, was the Peak Master of Spirit Peak. The other person was Xian Yi, Peak Master of Array Peak. Naturally, anyone who could be a Peak Master was definitely a perfected golden core. Even though all the peaks had their specialties, Spirit Peak was the strongest amongst them with the most disciples. Because they valued cultivation realms the most highly, everything they learned and imparted were killing techniques. If there were variant and heaven spirit roots, they would most likely be selected by Spirit Peak. When Xian smiled and stood up, "I'll go take a look and see how many tribulations of the life and death stage those two can pass." "Don't worry. Those with variant spirit roots are blessed by Providence. They'll naturally be able to pass the tribulation of life and death." A teasing expression flickered by the eyes of Peak Master Xianyi as he joked. "Look how anxious you are. Where's your poise as a Peak Master? Come, join me to take a look." With a hearty laugh, when Xian tugged at Xian Yi's wrist and wanted to leave together. Shaking his head, Xian Yi ducked away and laughed. "I'm not going. Won't I be giving myself troubles by watching your spirit peak take all the good talents away?" Right then, a chubby fat child ran over in a huff. "Peak Master! TT, this is bad." Both Peak Masters exchanged glances, looking surprised. "Why are you here too, junior brother?" the skinny child asked. Sweating from head to toe, the fat child waved his lumpy hand and cried out, "Peak Master, the spirit testing gate exploded." "Exploded?" Xian Yi and Wenxian looked at one another confused. Wenxian asked, "Why would it explode? Someone destroyed it?" "No." The fat child shook his head before nodding fervently. "Yes." "Wait, no." "No." Both Peak Masters were thoroughly confused. "Just what in the world happened? Speak properly." When Xian hollered with a solemn expression. The fat child could not help but recall the words of that scholar. Instinctively, he repeated, "It might be because the spirit testing gate had been enduring the rough weather for such a long time without proper maintenance. That's why it broke apart." Bam! When Xian flicked the fat child on the head. "Ow!" Clutching his head, he pursed his lips sadly. "What nonsense!" Xianyi could not hide his smile as he chuckled. "Who taught you that? I'm sure you didn't think up that on your own, right?" "A scholar told me that," the fat child replied. "But I think what he said makes sense too. And he was even kind enough to have me remind the sect to take care of our old structures so that. Bam! Yet another flick. Instantly, a big, swollen bump appeared on the forehead of the fat child. He was almost bursting into tears as he asked with teary eyes, "Peak Master, why are you hitting me? You're too silly, child. One day, you might even end up counting money for the man who sells you out." Xianyi did not know to laugh or to cry. When Xian spoke sternly, "Tell me the entire series of events. Do not hide anything from me. There was this scholar carrying a bow and saber. He came before the spirit testing gate and it displayed a fire spirit root." The fat child answered, "Carry on." But the spirit testing gate did not allow him to enter. The scholar then continued barging through, and the spirit testing gate exploded. When Xian and Xianyi frowned and exchanged glances, still confused. When Xian asked right away, "Are you sure it was a fire spirit root?" "Yes." The fat child replied instantly. "Peak Master, you've got to believe me. Even though I'm stupid, I can still tell that it's a fire spirit root." "That's strange." Xianyi could not figure out what happened. After a moment of silence, Xianyi spoke. "When Xian, I'll accompany you to see just what is up with this scholar." Without the use of any spirit weapons, the both of them soared through the skies and with a flip of their robes, carried the two children with them towards the front of the peak. Before long, all four of them arrived at where the spirit testing gate was. "It's indeed broken." Xianyi stared at the lump of rocks beneath him where the spirit testing gate once stood and murmured silently. When Xian asked, "Where is that scholar?" "Eh? He's gone." The fat child looked around. Suddenly Xianyi replied, "No, they're up the peak. The 8 distresses formation of the abyss has already been activated. Yes, those two with the variant spirit roots are there already." When Xian asked hurriedly, "How many tribulations have the two of them gone through?" "They've already passed 2, life and death. You can rest easy now, right?" Xianyi chuckled. After pausing slightly, Xianyi shook his head. "Wait, the bow and saber carrying scholar isn't going through the 8 distresses formation. He might have left already out of fear." When Xian harumphed gently, "This unknown lad appeared and destroyed our ethereal sex spirit testing gate and left just like that. Brazen! Caw, caw!" Right then, the hurried calls of a crane rang out from beyond the clouds. When Xian and Xianyi looked up, far above, a figure was shifting nimbly around the walls of the peak without falling off. Even while dodging the attacks of the crane, the figure was still climbing to the peak rapidly. Even with the eyesight of a perfected golden core, they could not see clearly due to the distance between them and the tip of the peak. "Xianyi, look! There's an ape!" When Xian said as he pointed to a black shadow on the peak. Chapter 67 Full Effort Face-Off. Chapter 67 Full Effort Face-Off. When he heard that, Xianyi laughed. "Fufu, what a sharp ape! Even he knows that we're one of the 5 main sects of the great Zhou dynasty, and that's why he wants to be accepted as a disciple of this fortuitous sect. Yes, that ape's quite agile. I wonder how long it can last under the attacks of our Lil Crane. Listen! Lil Crane seems to be angry, haha! Poor ape! Come on, let's go check it out." When Xian and Xianyi were both smiling and relaxed as they soared towards the peak carrying a child each. As they approached, when Xian and Xianyi found their smiles disappearing as they tore through the layers of mist. Instead, it looked as though they were witnessing something unbelievable. After a momentary silence, "Cough, that black shadow doesn't seem to be an ape?" Xianyi pointed to a black figure climbing to the peak as he coughed, and asked hesitantly, "Yes, it seems to be a human." When Xian smiled dryly, looking awkward. Both of them could not help but feel their faces flushing after committing such an elementary mistake despite being peak masters. But in truth, it was no wonder why they were mistaken. From a distance where the black figure was murky, it was leaping left and right like an agile ape. Even though both of them were perfected golden cores with an immense amount of knowledge, they would not have thought that the figure was a human. As they got closer, their expressions changed once more. That doesn't seem to be a human. Yes. There are two of them. After yet another momentary silence, Wen Xian could not help but grumble unhappily. What the hell is wrong with that person? If he wants to climb the peak, so be it. Why is he even carrying a fatty with him? Wait, that man's carrying a bow and saber too. Haven't I just heard of someone with that get-up? Xianyi remarked suddenly. Right then, the fat child beside Wen Xian pointed at the figure excitedly and yelled, Peak Master, that's him! That's the scholar! On the steep mountain peak. Each time the crane flapped its wings, Suzimo clung tightly onto the wall with his fingers and feet dug deeply into the rocks. Against Suzimo's fingers, those sturdy rocks seemed as soft as tofu. For any mortal, they would have to find places they could step on if they wanted to climb the peak. However, that was not the case for Suzimo. If not for the crane blocking his path, the peak he was climbing would be akin to flat ground for him. As of now, all the mortals after Suzimo had already fell due to the crane's flaps. He was the only one still climbing. To be exact, there were two mortals left. He was carrying the little fatty too. The crane's eyes shone with rage as it cried out. Soaring into the skies, it swooped down at Suzimo with its sharp talons. That was a vicious dive. Suzimo wanted to dodge, but it was too late. In the blink of an eye, he let go of his hand suddenly as he swayed dangerously in midair. He then reached out and dug himself into the wall once more. Snap! A large rock above Suzimo's head was smashed into dust by the crane's sharp talons as everything sprayed down on his face. However, he was unaware of it. When some of the rocks smashed on the little fatty's body, that rotund body trembled obviously. Suddenly, Suzimo realized something as he dangled the little fatty in midair and hollered, Stop pretending or I'll toss you down! The little fatty's eyes burst wide open as he replied hurriedly, Please don't scare me, bro! I know my mistakes now. Do you still want to reach the peak? Suzimo asked quickly. Yes, of course. Hold on to my back on your own. Don't blame me if you fall. Yes, yes. The little fatty shifted quickly and wrapped his arms and legs around Suzimo's neck and waist like an octopus. That way, even though Suzimo was still carrying an additional man, he had both hands to work with. At the start, the crane's attacks weren't ferocious. It was clear that its aim was not to injure, it merely wanted to deter Suzimo from climbing further. After multiple failed attempts, the crane was frustrated. That was why if Suzimo had not managed to dodge the previous attack, his brains might have been crushed by the crane's talons. He did not dare to be careless against an enraged early-stage Foundation establishment spirit demon. That was why he got the little fatty to a piggyback position so that he could have two hands to contend against the demon. In all fairness, Suzimo was only at the third section of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, and was not a match for the spirit demon yet, even if it was only at early-stage Foundation establishment. However, Suzimo's goal was not to fight it out with the crane. Instead, he merely wanted to dodge it and reach the peak. With that, things were much simpler. Swoosh! The crane dove once more as Suzimo's eyes shone brightly. Pushing his legs, he continued striding horizontally on the smooth walls of the peak as he dodged the attacks of the crane, while climbing up swiftly. Crack! 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 Suzimo's fingers and feet dug deep into the rocks. His speed was not inferior to when he was on the ground. Caw, caw! When the crane caught sight of that, it was even more enraged as it soared through the skies and burst off like a rocket, appearing behind Suzimo and attacking relentlessly with its talons and beak. Its long beak was even sharper than a flying sword, such that every single poke sent a sharp, ringing sound reverberating through Suzimo's ears. As long as the beak pierced him, there would definitely be a bloody hole on his body. The little fatty was so scared that he was shivering with his eyes closed tightly. Suzimo dodged repeatedly as his tendons cried out. With every single expansion and contraction, his blood would be filled as his large tendon convulsed intensely, pushing his body to its limits. Using just his spirit perception, Suzimo dodged the attack of the crane countless times as he continued climbing. The cries of the crane were getting more hurried, and in fact, there was even a hint of killing intent. He was getting closer to the top of the peak. At the same time, the crane's attacks were getting fiercer too. As the two Dao children looked at everything unfold from the top of the peak, they were sweating from head to toe for the scholar, as though they were the ones being attacked right at that moment. The man and the crane contended against one another on the steep peak. Even though the man seemed unable to fight back, it was still extremely dangerous and intense. Any bit slower and the scholar could very well be dead in the talons of the crane. Wen Xian and Xianyi had equally grim looks on their faces as they watched fixedly, prepared to save him if need be. To think that the scholar would still have strength left to be able to continue climbing while defending against our Lil Crane's attack. Xianyi's tone was somewhat amazed. Wen Xian commented solemnly, "If I'm not mistaken, the bow and saber on the scholar's waist are made from spiritual items. Even though those are pseudo-spirit weapons, they weigh more than an entire ton together." Wen Xian's remark had a clear meaning behind it. If Su Zimo had not been carrying the sanguine crystal bow and cold moon saber, he would have been even more agile and might have even reached the top of the peak by now. Wen Xian and Xianyi exchanged glances. There was a common consensus as a thought flashed through their minds. This scholar is interesting. Chapter 68 Ascending the Peak. Chapter 68 Ascending the Peak. How did this lad train his body? That level of nimbleness, harmony, and stretchability is something that even a spirit beast can't match. His movements resemble an ape and python, yet there are many differences. He might have learnt them through observing wild beasts. Seems like this lad is rather talented. I wonder how many tribulations of the 8 distresses formation he can pass. At that, both Wen Xian and Xianyi froze with a startled expression. Wen Xian murmured softly, "The 8 distresses formation is set up within the abyss beneath. If this lad truly ascends the peak, wouldn't it be equivalent to him passing the 8 distresses formation?" On the surface, Ethereal Sect's third life and death stage was for the cultivators to ascend the peak. However, in reality, they had set an obstacle, and it was intended for everyone to fall into the realm of the 8 distresses formation within the abyss. That was the reason why the fat child had almost let slip at the beginning of things. After all, no one would be able to ascend the peak. Only those who managed to pass through life and death tribulations within the 8 distresses formation would be sent to the top of the peak, where they would be able to join the sect. If they failed the 2 tribulations, they would be teleported outside and would not be able to join the sect. At the same time, those cultivators would not know what had happened at all, merely feeling fortunate that they did not die. The 8 distresses formation was a type of illusory formation that consisted of 8 tribulations: life, age, illness, death, meeting with what they hate, parting with what they love, unattained love, and all ills of the 5 skandhas of Buddhism. There were 2 reasons why they had to beat around the bush by requesting the cultivators to climb the peak before knocking them down. First, the steep peak would first deter the cowards and those who lack resolve. Immortal cultivation was a heavenly defying act and was a path of extreme difficulty. If even those who had resolves of steel and bravery may not even reach the endpoint, there was no room for cowards at all. Second, if everyone were mentally prepared that they would be faced with the 8 distresses formation, the illusory realm would not be able to bewitch them that easily. Ethereal sect would not be able to achieve their full aim. In the cultivation world, be it illusory skills or formations, there would definitely be distinct loopholes to it. If the affected party were to be able to maintain their composure and alertness, they would be able to see through it, and would not be bewitched by it. However, by sending the masses up the peak before beating them down, no one would be prepared, and as they were faced with death, they would definitely panic before they enter the 8 distresses formation of the abyss. Right then, with everyone assuming that they were dead, they would then accept the illusory realm and go through the death tribulation. Once they passed the death tribulation and endure through the life tribulation, they would be considered to have passed the 3rd stage of Ethereal Sect's tests, and would be able to join the sect. Of course, there were 8 tribulations to the 8 distresses formation, and the more tribulations one could pass, the better. This was not just a simple test, it was a rite of passage for the mind. After all, everyone would have to endure the pain of the 8 distresses in their lifetime, and cultivators were no exception to it. Yet, a problem had appeared. If Su Zimo managed to ascend the peak, Ethereal Sect's 3rd stage would have been set for nothing. When Xian lowered his voice further and said, "Let me attack and strike him down secretly. We can't go against the rules of the sect by accepting someone that hasn't gone through the 3rd stage." Xian shook his head and chuckled. "No matter. Right now, I'm honestly curious as to whether he can ascend the peak with just his own strength." Pausing for a moment, Xian Yi's eyes lit up as he remarked gruffly, "If the lad truly manages to ascend, I'll set an array formation for him myself to let him have a full taste of the 8 distresses formation." As the peak master of Array Peak, the 8 distresses formation was his masterpiece. For a peak master to declare that he wanted to lay an array formation personally for an unknown scholar was something that had never occurred through the history of Ethereal Sect. On the wall, the man and the crane were still going at it. Su Zimo was already sweating all over. His eyes remained bright as always, emanating an endless fight in them. Initially, the little fatty kept his eyes shut and was extremely frightened. However, he was now fully excited, yelling from time to time from Su Zimo's back to taunt the crane. "Caw, caw!" Despite trying everything, the crane could not stop Su Zimo in his tracks at all. Coupled with the little fatty's mocking, it was even more furious, and its attacks turned fiercer. Su Zimo was pent up as well after being chased by the crane for such a long time. Seeing that he was merely a step away from the top of the peak, Su Zimo took in a deep breath and circulated the Anaconda Eclipse's Mind Sutra before bellowing, "Damn bird, take this!" Clang! A sharp slicing sound rang through the place. Su Zimo had retrieved the cold moon saber on his waist and slashed upwards. Swash! A cold light shot through the air. Stunned, the crane no longer dared to attack Su Zimo as it flapped and ran away. It had not expected Su Zimo to make a move. More than that, it had not expected that Su Zimo would dare to make a move on it. Within Ethereal Sect, no one dared to bully it. Notwithstanding the 5 peak masters, even Ethereal Sect's master would dote on it. The job of pushing potential sect applicants into the 8 distresses formation was initially done by other cultivators of the sect. However, the crane volunteered to do it thinking that it was interesting. Indeed, it was rather fun at the start to see people being chased into the 8 distresses formation one by one. Yet the crane no longer found it fun after encountering this bow and saber carrying scholar. A feather glided by slowly. Even though the crane had managed to dodge the attack, the cold moon saber still sliced away one of its feathers. That sight caused the 2 peak masters watching above to freeze momentarily, almost striking out as they gripped their spirit weapons tightly. "The gall of that lad to dare bully Lil Crane! He's definitely going to have a hard time in the future if he gets accepted into the sect." Both Wen Xian and Xian Yi looked at Su Zimo with a trace of pity. Right then, Su Zimo did not know what was going on. After that slash, he was overjoyed as he burst out laughing. "Damn bird, you're still too weak. Go back and train for a couple more years." With a reverse throw, Su Zimo stabbed the cold moon saber into the wall of the peak and in one swift leap, jumped onto the blade with the tip of his toes. He then hopped up while conveniently pulling the cold moon saber out of the wall with his feet. The entire process was fluid as water without any pauses at all. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived at the top of the peak. Looking down at the crane that was still circling around in midair, Su Zimo waved and smiled. "Goodbye." The crane was still in its infancy stage. In human years, it was nothing more than 8 years old, and that was when it was most playful. Even though it wasn't injured by that slash, it still felt upset about it. Looking at Su Zimo's actions, the crane blinked a few times as though it was about to tear up before flying towards Ethereal Peak while crying nonstop. "Caw, caw! Caw, caw!" The cries of the crane reverberated through Ethereal Peak, alarming many people. "Eh? Didn't Lil Crane go to the front peak to bully them? Why does it look as though it was the one that was bullied?" A brown-haired youth seated within a palace on Elixir Peak asked curiously. From a palace on Talisman Peak came a cold-looking middle-aged lady. Watching the crane fly through the air, she frowned slightly and muttered, "What's wrong with Lil Crane? To think that someone of Ethereal sect would dare bully it?" A disheveled old man appeared on Weapon Peak as well. Slovenly dressed, he burst out in laughter. "How dare to see Lil Crane being on the losing end? Interesting, interesting." Chapter 69 Shocking Slash. Chapter 69 Shocking Slash. Su Zimo turned around and saw 4 people. He had met the 2 children previously. Apart from them, there were 2 middle-aged cultivators with exceptional auras, looking at him weirdly. Su Zimo guessed that the 2 of them must be seniors of Ethereal Peak. Placing Lil Fatty down, Su Zimo noticed that there were 8 gigantic flags around half as high as them being planted around each of them. The flags had mysterious patterns drawn on them as they flapped in the wind. "What's that?" Su Zimo frowned. Without thinking more about it, he stabilized his breathing and arranged his attire before greeting the 2 middle-aged cultivators. "Greetings, seniors. I'm Su Zimo of Yen Country. I've managed to ascend the peak by luck. Activate!" Before Su Zimo could even finish, he was interrupted by a loud holler. The 8 flags surrounding Su Zimo and Little Fatty illuminated brightly as the patterns shone with a bedazzling glow. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo felt an ominous sense of danger. The last thing he saw was one of the middle-aged cultivators sweeping his robes from a distance away as an unblockable energy blasted at them. The energy was tremendous, and Su Zimo could not resist it at all. He was swept off the peak and fell over, watching the top of the peak turn smaller by the second. His body was not his to control at all as fear started growing within him. Bam! Su Zimo fell into the abyss, and his entire body was crushed. Even though his physical body was clearly destroyed, Su Zimo was still entirely conscious. Endless waves of pain shot through him, biting at him tirelessly as his tendons tore and his flesh was shredded. What was happening? Su Zimo could not understand at all. In fact, he did not have the time to think about it as he was tormented by the endless pain. He had never understood the sort of pain that one would experience in the face of death. An intense fear existed between the edge of life and death. It was a fear that could cause one to break down. For humans, it was almost instinct for them to fear death. If they could even shit their pants by having a sword pointed at their throat, how terrifying would it be to be faced with death itself? At the top of the peak, Su Zimo and Little Fatty stood motionlessly with their eyes shut and bodies shivering. Either of them had fallen into the abyss. The both of them were now within the illusion of the activated 8 Distresses formation. This 8 Distresses formation is even stronger than the one in the abyss since you're the one who created it personally. Would the 2 of them be able to endure it? Wen Xian asked worriedly. Xianyi replied, "Let's wait and see. As long as they can get through one tribulation, they'll be considered to have passed the test." Right then, 3 figures appeared on the top of the peak. The 3 of them had passed the test of the 8 Distresses formation from within the abyss. After crossing the life and death tribulations, they were teleported to the top of the peak. All 3 of them looked pale as a sheet, sweating from head to toe as they sat where they were feebly, looking lost and dazed. The 2 Dao children rushed up and fed all 3 of them an elixir each. Once they consumed it, the 3 people looked more relaxed as their faces started to fill with life once more. "The 2 fellas with the variant spirit roots are not bad. They've already passed through 3 tribulations," Xianyi suddenly mentioned. Wen Xian sighed. "Of the 8 distresses, life, death, illness and age are easier to get through. However, the later 4 tribulations are one tougher than the other. Even for myself who has already attained a core, I may not be able to get through all the tribulations." The moment he said that, one of the 8 flags swayed gently before shooting into the skies with a blinding light. Xianyi heaved out a sigh of relief and nodded. "Not bad. The lad has already crossed the tribulation of death." A moment later, the haughty man and white-bloused woman were sent to the top of the peak. Wen Xian looked at the both of them and smiled. "Well done, you guys have passed through 4 tribulations. Take a rest at the side. Swoosh! Yet another huge flag swayed before bursting into the skies. That's fast? He's already endured through the distress of life? Xianyi was surprised. The distress of life was something that everyone had to go through but have forgotten. Within the womb, a fetus would be coiled into a ball with its arms and feet unable to stretch, and neither could it breathe. It was akin to being sealed in a tight cage, and the pain of it was excruciating. That was also the reason why babies would cry the moment they are born. Before long, another streak of light broke through the clouds. Right after, a fourth beam of light. When Xian and Xianyi exchanged glances, both could read the shock in the other's eyes. From Elixir Peak, a brown-haired youth soared into the skies and looked at the lights from afar, frowning to himself. That light's from a flag for the 8 Distresses formation. There's actually someone who could have Xianyi create the formation personally? With a slight pause, he muttered to himself, "No, I've got to go check it out." At the same time, a shadow streaked out towards the front peak from Talisman and Weapon Peak respectively. Bam! A fifth beam of light appeared. Before long, a brown-haired youth, cold-faced middle-aged lady and a disheveled old man appeared on the top of the peak as well. All 5 peak masters were gathered. Swoosh! A huge flag wavered. A 6th beam of light. He's already passed through 6 of the 8 distresses. What a mental fortitude! Where is this lad from? The brown-haired youth asked with a deep voice. He's from Yan country. I don't know anything other than that. When Xian shook his head, the cold-faced lady swept her gaze across Su Zimo's body and frowned, asking, "Fire spirit root?" That seemed to be the case. However, for some reason, the spirit testing gate refused to let him through. "We can test him with a spirit stone again later." When Xian replied. Right after he replied, bam! The 7th beam of light shot through. Su Zimo had passed through the 7th tribulation. Little Fatty was already sprawled on the ground bawling in tears after enduring through the tribulations of life and death. He had yet to pull himself out of the pain received from the tribulations of the 8 distresses. During the time, the 2 Dao children explained to everyone present about the entirety of the life and death stage. From the initial 500-odd applicants, there were only 6 remaining on the peak who had passed the 3rd stage. Other than the haughty man, white-bloused woman and little Fatty, the remaining 3 were mortals without spirit chi. Everyone looked at Su Zimo with a complicated gaze. They had just gone through the tribulations of the 8 distresses personally, and could still remember the excruciating pain they had gone through. None of them could imagine the sort of torment it would be to endure through 7 different distresses. Xianyi spoke with a grim tone. The 8th distress is of the 5 skandhas. That is akin to all of the previous 7 distresses combined and isn't something any human could endure. Let me dispel the formation lest the lad is hurt. He was just about to move when an 8th beam of light shone. It was extremely bedazzling on the peak and illuminated half the skies above them. At the same time, Su Zimo suddenly opened both eyes and with a burning killing intent, he reverse gripped his cold moon saber and slashed forward. It was a breathtaking slash. That single slash was even brighter than the 8th beam that had covered the entire peak. It was directed right at Xianyi with an intent so chilling that the air on the peak seemed to have frozen and gone stale. All 5 peak masters were stunned right away. After all, the slash happened way too suddenly. Xianyi's expression was unchanged. Extending his finger, a light exuded from the tip of it as he tapped gently at the cold moon saber. Clang! The cold moon saber was sent flying. Su Zimo's body jolted as he stumbled back a couple of steps and nearly slipped off the top of the peak. When he saw the abyss beneath the layer of clouds below him, Su Zimo slowly woke up and realized that everything he had experienced was merely an illusion. The gazes of the 5 peak masters looking at Su Zimo changed slowly. Chapter 70 Joining Ethereal Peak. Chapter 70 Joining Ethereal Peak. The thing that truly shocked the 5 peak masters was not the fact that Su Zimo had endured through the 8 distresses. It was that slash of his. As perfected golden cores, all 5 of them could sense the sort of energy the slash carried along. Its might had surpassed even the full strength of a perfected Qi refinement warrior. For a mere mortal to surpass the strength of a perfected Qi refinement warrior with just a burst of his physical body, what sort of a phenomenon was that? That was proof that this man's body was as tough as spirit beasts. In fact, he might even be able to match early-stage Foundation establishment spirit demons. Not just that, Suzimo's slash carried a heavy killing intent. This man must have killed quite a number of times to display a slash as such. Yet, how could a mortal have killed so many times? Furthermore, their shock came from the fact that Suzimo had dared to strike at Xianyi with such resolute decisiveness. One had to understand that Suzimo was but a mere mortal. However, Xianyi was a perfected golden core, the peak master of array peak. To mere mortals, he was what they would define as immortals. Yet, Suzimo's slash had the intention of murdering an immortal. Why did you strike at me? Xianyi's gaze was bright as he glared at Suzimo and asked grimly. By now, Suzimo had realized that he had fallen into an illusion and everything he had experienced was merely his hallucinations. Lowering his head, he replied, I mistook you as the one who had struck at me to push me off the peak. Hence the attack? The 5 peak masters had expected that answer. However, that answer was also troubling at the same time. This was a man that couldn't be tamed. Be it whether the other party was an immortal or had anyone strong backing him, as long as this man was offended, he would kill the other party. To them, Suzimo was like a double-edged sword. Resolute and sharp, not only could he kill, he could injure them as well. It was hard to tell if it would be a fortune or disaster accepting someone like this into the sect. However, Suzimo had an extremely rare mental fortitude such that he was even able to endure through the tribulations of the 8 distresses. It would be difficult for Ethereal Peak to give up on such a rare talent. Furthermore, Suzimo had already passed all 3 tests of the sect. Exchanging glances, all 5 peak masters could not arrive at a decision. Normally, Spirit Peak's master, Wen Xian, would definitely be the first to accept someone as such. Yet, he was keeping silent at the moment. Contemplating silently, Wen Xian retrieved a spirit testing stone from his storage bag and handed it to Suzimo. Test your spirit root again. Suzimo gripped the spirit testing stone tightly. It shone scarlet red and emanated heat. All 5 peak masters nodded their heads in agreement. Fire element, heaven's spirit root. That's right. Before that thought passed them, the spirit testing stone turned into ash and scattered from Suzimo's fingertips. Everyone was stunned. What had just happened? The fat child pointed at Suzimo agitatedly. Peak Master, see! I didn't lie! Even though all 5 peak masters were perfected golden cores, they had never seen anyone who could turn a spirit testing stone into ash for a mere test. It was weird. Suddenly, an authoritative voice boomed out in all 5 of their minds. This lad has too much killing intent and is too brash. Since he has a fire spirit root, we can let him join the weapon peak to learn more about the craft of refining weapons. We can make other plans for him after we shave away some of his aggressiveness. That voice was from Ethereal Peak's sect master. Other than the 5 peak masters, no one else knew what was going on. The peak master of Weapon Peak was the disheveled old man. He snickered at Suzimo. Come, follow me back to the Weapon Peak. From now on, you'll be a trial disciple of Ethereal Peak. You'll be under me. Understood. Suzimo nodded. The haughty man, white-bloused woman and little fatty were inducted into Spirit Peak naturally while the 3 remaining mortals were assigned to Elixir, Array and Talisman Peak. Waving his oily robes, the disheveled old man collected Suzimo and left the peak. Before long, Suzimo was brought to the Weapon Peak as the disheveled old man remarked. I'm your master from now on. We don't have so many rules here in Weapon Peak. You can just call me old man. Shui. Yes, you. Come here. The disheveled old man beckoned to a disciple passing by nearby. The man named Shui was frail and skinny. Running over, he nodded his head to the disheveled old man and greeted courteously. Master, Su Zimo here has just joined the sect and he's your junior brother. Go get him one of our sect badges and items for trial disciples before choosing a cave abode. After giving his instructions, the disheveled old man waved his robes and left. I'll be troubling you then, senior brother, Su Zimo greeted with cupped fists. Shui smiled and waved it off. It's fine, don't stand on courtesy. He brought Su Zimo before a majestic cock loft and introduced. This is our Elixir Peak Spirit Weapon Chamber. If any of the trial disciples from the 5 peaks want a spirit weapon, they would have to come exchange for it using their contribution points. To exchange for spirit stones, elixirs and cultivation manuals, one would have to use contribution points too. How do you get contribution points? Su Zimo asked. There is a mission steal within the 5 peaks that will refresh with new missions every now and then. The greater the difficulty of the missions, the more contribution points they give. Shui brought Su Zimo to the spirit weapon chamber and greeted the elderly guard. Senior, this is a new disciple of Weapon Peak and he's here for a sect badge. Oh, name? The elderly guard opened his sleepy eyes and asked feebly. Su Zimo. From his storage bag, the elderly guard retrieved a long jade badge where one side was etched with mysterious patterns and the other side was smooth and blank. With his sharp nails, the elderly guard shot out a stream of spirit chi and wrote down in cursive letters, Su Zimo. Tossing the badge out, the elderly guard went back to sleep. Su Zimo took the badge over and examined it to find out that there was nothing extraordinary about it. Shui smiled. Junior brother, don't look down on this sect badge. Holding it gives you freedom in and out of the sect, and even the mystifying fog barrier outside can't affect you. Su Zimo nodded his head and kept it carefully. Suddenly, Shui slapped his own head as though he recalled something. He then turned and smiled to the elderly guard. Senior, are you forgetting about something? Without even opening his eyes, the elderly guard tossed out a storage bag casually. Receiving it, Shui passed it to Su Zimo. Junior brother, there's a manual for the spirit peering art and chi condensation along with 10 inferior grade spirit stones. Do keep it well. Shui knew that Su Zimo had not mastered chi condensation yet and hence opened the storage bag before placing one of the 2 manuals in the latter's hands. He summoned a flying sword and had Su Zimo hop on it. Arriving at the mid of the peak, he pointed to a row of cave abodes. Weapon Peak does not have much disciples, so many of our cave abodes are empty. Just pick whichever one you fancy, junior brother. Remembering that he had to cultivate his mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, Su Zimo chose a secluded one at the corner as his home in Ethereal Peak. Chapter 71 Frightening Cultivation Speed. Chapter 71 Frightening Cultivation Speed. The cave abode was extremely spacious, and after some quiet meditation, Su Zimo contained his excitement of joining the sect. Placing the sect badge around his waist like Shui, he took out the 2 manuals. Spirit peering art was a fundamental skill in the cultivation world where almost every cultivator had to learn it. Through lining their eyes with spirit chi, one could determine the cultivation realm of other cultivators. But of course, there are rare cultivation techniques as well that could help one hide their cultivation realm from spirit peering art's detection. The chi condensation manual could be considered as an entry skill for Ethereal sect. Everything from opening storage bags, cultivating the spirit peering art, sword kinesis flight, refining elixirs and weapons required one to have spirit chi. Because Su Zimo had a fire spirit root, the spirit chi he could manifest from chi condensation would naturally carry the fire element. Before he left, Shui had informed Su Zimo that there would be a welcome ceremony held 10 days later at Ethereal Palace, which was situated at the main peak of Ethereal sect. Along with many seniors, the sect master would be present as well, and all the new disciples were required to attend it. Su Zimo was determined to reach level 1 chi condensation before the welcome ceremony. The very thought that he would be able to obtain sword kinesis flight once he achieved chi condensation had Su Zimo's blood boiling with excitement. he would no longer have to be in the wretched state of being chased by other cultivators. Opening the Qi condensation manual slowly, Su Zimo was gradually immersed in the lines of tiny words. The first step of Qi condensation was to obtain a sense of Qi. Spirit Qi was everywhere, and it was akin to breathing air. However, one would not be able to sense spirit Qi without a spirit root. Following the instructions of the Qi condensation manual, it took an hour before Su Zimo felt a warm sensation channeling in the air around him. It was a fresh, unique sensation unlike anything he had ever felt before. So, this is spirit Qi. As his thoughts wavered, the sensation disappeared and he could no longer sense that warm energy. This? A flicker shot through Su Zimo's eyes as he pondered about it before coming to a realization. There were 3 words written on the first page of the Qi condensation manual: mindful Qi condensation. Only if one was at peace and mindful would they be able to sense the existence of spirit Qi. The moment they were distracted, the sensation would dissipate. But no matter what, Su Zimo was slightly relieved that he had managed to achieve the first step of sensing spirit Qi. After all, there was something odd about the fire spirit root within him. Not only could it destroy spirit testing stones, it even caused the sect's spirit testing gate to explode. Previously, Su Zimo was still worried whether an implanted spirit root would achieve the same effects as an innate one. Now, it seemed as though those worries were unwarranted. The second step of Qi condensation was to absorb the Qi internally. It wasn't enough to just sense the spirit Qi, one had to control and absorb it. The third step was to channel the Qi to the Dantian. After absorbing it into the body, one would have to control and channel it to the Dantian. That was the only way to ensure that the spirit Qi would be fully his instead of being dispersed through the body. With that, he would have achieved level 1 Qi condensation. Casting aside all distractions, Su Zimo emptied his mind and felt at the warm aura around him before absorbing it into his body slowly. All of a sudden, Su Zimo felt a warm sensation appearing in his right hand as a stream of spirit Qi entered it. Interesting. The Qi condensation manual did not mention which part of the body will be used to absorb the spirit Qi. However, it was a new experience for Su Zimo to have the spirit Qi enter through his right hand. The stream of spirit Qi that entered his body was rampant and wild. Frantically, Su Zimo worked to control and channel it to his Dantian. The Dantian was like the treasure trove of one's body. The moment the spirit Qi was channeled in, everything became calm once more. Level 1 Qi condensation. Su Zimo opened his eyes, which were filled with excitement and a hint of incredibility. Night had just descended, which meant to say that he had only spent less than 2 hours. The fact that he had managed to reach level 1 Qi condensation within such a short time felt surreal to Su Zimo. Seems like that's the power of a heaven spirit root. Su Zimo smiled. Now that he had achieved Qi condensation, he was in a good mood and decided to continue absorbing spirit Qi, working towards level 2 without resting. His right hand was still the first to feel warm as the spirit Qi gushed in endlessly, controlled and channeled by Su Zimo to his Dantian. Su Zimo was immersed in his cultivation, and just like that, an entire night had passed. Level 2 Qi condensation. Within a single night, Su Zimo had achieved level 2 Qi condensation. Isn't this a little too soon? Is that how fast things move with a heaven spirit root? He was a little stunned. Su Zimo did not know the speed in which others cultivated at. However, he merely felt that it was unusual for him to cultivate that quickly. After all, he had not even made use of spirit stones and elixirs yet for the previous night. If he had used them, wouldn't his cultivation speed be even faster? He decided to cast aside all his queries first, and to ask his other seniors when he had the chance. The thought of spirit stones gave Su Zimo an idea. Before he left Pingyang town, he killed Zhou Dingyun and had managed to obtain a storage bag. Now that he was at level 2 Qi condensation, he could finally use it. Taking out Zhou Dingyun's storage bag, a stream of spirit Qi flowed out of Su Zimo's fingertips as he touched the storage bag gently. It opened up and a space floated out from within with more than 1,300 inferior grade spirit stones lined together. Other than another jade bottle, there was nothing else. He opened the jade bottle. It contained 3 elixirs as a gentle fragrance wafted out. Su Zimo whiffed at the fragrance, and the calm spirit qi that was contained in his dantian began to rumble. He instantly understood that those 3 elixirs would benefit him in absorbing spirit qi. For someone like him who had just achieved qi condensation, this was quite a small fortune. Su Zimo kept the spirit stones, elixirs, sanguine crystal bow, cold moon saber and the quiver on his back into the storage bag given to him by the sect. Right away, his entire body felt lighter with 1 ton worth of weight removed. The amazing thing about storage bags was that no matter the weight of the items kept in them, the user would not feel it at all. Opening the manual for the Spirit Peering Art began cultivating it. He spent the rest of his time cultivating the Qi Condensation Manual in the daytime, and the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness in the nighttime. Just like that, 10 days had passed. The welcome ceremony for the 7 new disciples of the sect had finally arrived. Su Zimo tidied his attire before leaping off his stone bed. Even though 10 days had passed, Su Zimo's Qi condensation was still at level 1 and had not increased. In reality, he was already at level 4 Qi condensation by the 7th day, and his dantian had amassed a large amount of spirit qi. However, Su Zimo recalled Dai Yu's advice. Some of the truly talented cultivators would choose to use the spirit qi to refine their physical body while cultivating. For the next 3 days thereafter, he used all the spirit qi he had amassed to refine his body, leaving only a portion left in his dantian. Even though he made no progress for his marrow cleansing section, Su Zimo's body was now much stronger than it was 10 days ago. He estimated that by now, even a full-forced attack by a level 10 perfected Qi refinement warrior using an inferior-grade spirit weapon would not be able to pierce his skin. Chapter 72 Mystical Guardian Beast. Chapter 72 Mystical Guardian Beast. Junior Brother Su, I'm Shui. Are you around? Suddenly, a voice rang out from outside the cave abode. It was Senior Brother Shui, the person who had brought Su Zimo around initially. Su Zimo opened the door hurriedly. Now that they were meeting again, Su Zimo subconsciously activated his spirit peering art and discovered that Shui was a Qi refinement warrior with level 9 Qi condensation. Eh? Shui looked at Su Zimo with shock and incredulity, asking, Junior Brother Su, you're already at level 1 Qi condensation? Su Zimo could not figure out what Shui meant by that and merely nodded his head, afraid that he might make a mistake by speaking. Wow, that's incredible! Shui could not help but gasp. Su Zimo froze for a moment. It was incredible for someone to reach level 1 Qi condensation in 10 days? If he had not used the spirit Qi to refine his body, he would already be at level 5 Qi condensation. Coughing gently, Su Zimo asked, Su Zimo, how long does it normally take for someone to reach level 1 Qi condensation? That would have to depend on their spirit root. For example, I have an earth spirit root, and it took me close to an entire month to reach level 1 Qi condensation. You have to understand that out of the 3 steps, sensing and absorbing spirit Qi is the most difficult for beginners to grasp. They either fail to sense the existence of spirit Qi or they're unable to absorb it. All of that will require time to cultivate, test, grasp, and discover, Shui explained. Even though Su Zimo's expression was indifferent, he was even more curious in his heart now. Sensing and absorbing spirit Qi posed no challenge to him at all, unlike what Shui had explained. Could that be the benefit of having a heaven spirit root? The moment he thought of that, Su Zimo smiled. It might be because I've got a heaven spirit root and that's why I cultivate it faster. That must be it. Suddenly enlightened, Shui nodded his head. It's indeed much easier for those with a heaven spirit root to attain Qi condensation. I heard that some geniuses take a single day to reach level 1 Qi condensation. But don't feel bad, Junior Brother. It's already extremely fast for you to reach level 1 within 10 days. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. In reality, he had only taken less than 2 hours to reach level 1 Qi condensation. But according to Shui, even the fastest geniuses require a single day. How could this be? He then thought about the explosion of the spirit testing gate, the ashing of the spirit testing stone, his frightening cultivation speed, and all the other weird phenomenons. The only explanation was that the heaven spirit root given to him by Dai Yu was much stronger than real heaven spirit roots. I can't teach you anymore. Hence, I have planted a spirit root in you. The quality won't be any lesser than the heaven spirit root. Next, join a clan and cultivate for immortality. That was what Dai Yu said to him. It sounded casual and in fact even nonchalant. But it was only now that Su Zimo realized how horrifying the spirit root she had planted for him was. Suddenly, Shui frowned and asked oddly, "Wait, that's weird. Junior brother, you've got a heaven spirit root. How come you're in our weapon peak instead of spirit peak? What's the difference?" Su Zimo asked. "A huge one." Laughing, Shui replied, "It's almost time for the welcome ceremony. I'll take you there and explain along the way." Summoning a flying sword, Shui beckoned for Su Zimo to join him before they sped off to Ethereal Peak. Along the way, Su Zimo found out from Shui that even though each of the 5 peaks had their own specialties, Spirit Peak was the strongest with the most disciples, followed by Talisman Peak and Array Peak. The weakest ones were Elixir Peak and Weapon Peak. Spirit Peak's forte was in killing and battle skills. That was why, by logic, all those with heaven spirit roots would be sent to Spirit Peak. A strong mastery of fire is required for both refinement of elixirs and weapons. Yet Ethereal Peak was not well versed in fire techniques. Out of the 5 sects, True Fire Sect was the most knowledgeable towards fire. In the Great Zhou dynasty, there would be a competition between the sects once every 10 years where all major and minor sects would participate. There would then be 4 ranking lists of spirit, weapon, elixir and talisman for the top 10 of each. That was a mere 40 people out of hundreds of sects and thousands of their most talented cultivators. Anyone who could have their names listed on the rankings would not only receive immense prestige, there would be tremendous rewards as well, and it was proof that they were the true talents of the Great Zhou dynasty. Out of every sect competition, Ethereal Sect would gain the most spots on the Spirit ranking, followed by the Talisman ranking. However, they've never managed to get any spots on both the Weapon and Elixir rankings. That was the reason why Shui could not understand how someone like Su Zimo, who possessed a Heaven Spirit root, was sent to Weapon Peak instead of Spirit Peak. Su Zimo could guess at the reasons why it was so. Firstly, he had destroyed the sect's spirit testing gate. Secondly, he struck out at Array Peak's master, Xian Yi. This arrangement might have been a punishment for him. However, Su Zimo was not bothered by it at all. From what Shui had said, all the Qi refinement warriors in Ethereal Sect were all trial disciples, and none of them could enter Ethereal Peak, which was surrounded by all 5 peaks, freely. Only Foundation Establishment cultivators were considered as inner sect disciples and would have a chance of obtaining middle-grade spirit weapons and better cultivation techniques. With Su Zimo's cultivation speed, it would take a mere couple of years for him to become an inner sect disciple. Before long, the both of them arrived at Ethereal Peak, where a majestic palace stood erected not too far away, barely visible through the clouds. There was a sign on top of the palace with the words Ethereal Palace etched in it. Shui brought Su Zimo towards Ethereal Palace. Along the way, a statue of a crane stood erect. It was gigantic, at 100 feet tall, with its eyes shut and exuding an authoritative aura with golden and shimmering, lifelike feathers. Compared to the gigantic statue, Su Zimo and Shui were like tiny ants. Even though Su Zimo felt that the statue looked familiar, he did not think too much about it and merely commented in praise. "I wonder who created this statue. It's so lifelike that it's almost like a real crane." Sure. Suddenly, Shui Yi's expression changed as he shushed at Su Zimo right away. "What's wrong?" Su Zimo whispered uneasily. Wiping away his sweat, Shui replied, "That's not a statue. That's Ethereal Sect's mystical guardian beast. It's alive." "Alive?" Su Zimo coughed gently and raised his head to look at it again awkwardly. Because the crane stood there motionlessly, Su Zimo's first thought was that it was a statue. "What's it perched here for then?" Su Zimo asked again. Shaking his head, Shui replied, I've got no idea either. Senior Crane usually stays within the Ethereal Palace, and it's rare for normal disciples to catch a glimpse of it. I guess we're really lucky today. Pausing for a moment, Shui looked around with a mysterious expression, whispered gently. Though, I heard that Senior Crane's child was bullied to tears by a new disciple recently. Perhaps it's here to settle things with that disciple. I wonder who's the unlucky one, hee hee. Su Zimo suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned around. Blinking his eyes slowly, he asked, Say, is the child of this Senior Crane a crane too? Isn't that just nonsense? Obviously it is. Shui laughed. Su Zimo did not find it funny in the slightest bit. Chapter 73 Tianhuang Mainland. Chapter 73 Tianhuang Mainland. When Shui saw Su Zimo stopping in his tracks with a weird expression, he asked softly, What's wrong, junior brother? Why do you look so pale? Su Zimo did not reply. As though he had recalled something, Shui gasped and pointed at Su Zimo with a stutter. Why you're not that, you unlucky soul, right? Right then, Su Zimo felt a cold wind and goosebumps rising all over his body. It was as though he was being targeted by an incomparably strong being. Su Zimo's body froze and his hands and feet turned cold as he turned around and raised his head slowly. Unknowingly, the gigantic crane behind the both of them had its eyes opened, glaring at them with an icy gaze. Before the crane, Su Zimo felt that he was incomparably small, and that comparison wasn't merely for their size, it was in terms of power. If the crane wanted him dead, it did not even have to make a move. A single thought was more than enough. The air around them seemed to have gone stale as a killing intent spread slowly, making it seem as though the heavens could collapse at any moment. All of a sudden, the crane spread its wings and soared through the skies, passing by the both of them and headed towards Ethereal Palace. Its gigantic wings covered almost half of the skies as the wind howled with billowing sand. In the blink of an eye, the crane entered Ethereal Palace and disappeared from sight. Within that short moment of a few breaths, Shui's face had turned pale as a sheet, and he was covered in sweat. He could not help but turn to look at Su Zimo. Standing where he was, Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. Other than a slightly pale look on his face, his eyes held no fear. Junior brother, aren't you afraid? Shui could not help but ask. Su Zimo shook his head. If Senior Crane wanted me dead, he would have struck long ago. Why wait till now and even wait for me before Ethereal Palace? That's true. Shui breathed out heavily and nodded. Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, What's the cultivation realm of Senior Crane? No idea. However, its child has an extraordinary bloodline and is a spirit demon that's equivalent to an early-stage foundation establishment. Imagine, it's just in its infancy stage and hasn't cultivated at all. How strong would it be when it grows up in the future? Shui was clearly reminding Su Zimo to be careful in the future as well. Not long later, the haughty man, white-bloused woman, Little Fatty and everyone else arrived at Ethereal Palace too. When Little Fatty caught sight of Su Zimo, his eyes shone brightly as he greeted and stumbled over. Bro, amazing! You're already at level 1 chi condensation. Little Fatty snickered. The haughty man and white-bloused woman swept their gazes past Su Zimo indifferently. To them, there was nothing special about reaching level 1 chi condensation in 10 days. Su Zimo checked out the rest using the spirit peering art. Within 10 days, both the haughty man and white-bloused woman had already broken through to level 6 chi condensation, while Little Fatty was still at level 5. The other 3 trial disciples had not managed to attain chi condensation yet. Say, I don't know your name yet? Since the welcome ceremony had not started yet, Su Zimo began to chat with the Little Fatty idly. That caused the Little Fatty to give off a rare look of embarrassment, as he chuckled dryly. My surname's Pang and my name's Z. Frozen for a long time, Su Zimo repressed his amusement and praised. What a great name! How befitting one! Heh! Pointing at the haughty man, Little Fatty whispered. That cocky fella's name is Feng Haoyu and that ice-cold beauty is Ling Ro. Bro, have you realized something? What? That guy's surname is Feng and so he has a wind spirit root. The ice-cold beauty's surname is Ling and so she has an ice spirit root. I've decided. I'll definitely not have my son's surname be Pang. He'll be called Lei, Guang, and Wan or whatnot. That way, he'll definitely have a variant spirit root. Man, the thought of it is awesome. Su Zimo. As they conversed, many cultivators gathered before Ethereal Palace. Most of them were Foundation Establishment cultivators, Ethereal Peak's intersect disciples. There were also some cultivators that had flown over. They were clearly perfected golden cores. The 5 peak masters were present as well, standing before Ethereal Palace with an emptied space in the middle for them. Before long, a bell rang out from within Ethereal Palace and reverberated through the 5 peaks and into the valleys. Accompanying the ring, an elderly figure in his 50s clad in golden robes came forth slowly from Ethereal Palace. Standing before the entrance, he swept his gaze across Su Zimo and the other disciples. For some reason, Su Zimo sensed that the golden-robed elder's gaze seemed to have lingered slightly longer on him. I'm Ethereal Peak's master, Ling Yun. Ethereal Peak is one of the 5 major sects within the Great Zhou dynasty. However, all of you have to understand that the land we're on is part of Tianhuang Mainland, which consists of 4 regions, 3 oceans and 1 continent. Even the Great Zhou dynasty is merely one of the dynasties in the northern region of Tianhuang Mainland, and there are 3 other dynasties with similar strength to it. Su Zimo's mouth gaped apart slightly in shock. The Great Zhou dynasty was enough for him to look up to back in Pingyang town. It was at this moment that Su Zimo realized how insignificant the Great Zhou dynasty, and even Ethereal sect was compared to Tianhuang Mainland. If he had continued staying within Pingyang town, he would be like a frog in a well, merely only able to see a pitiable portion of the skies. But of course, given Su Zimo's current strength, notwithstanding the 4 regions, 3 oceans and 1 continent, it wasn't even enough for him to move about unhindered within the Great Zhou dynasty. After taking note of the shock within the eyes of Su Zimo and the rest, Sect Master Ling Yun nodded his head and continued. Of the 7 of you, some have already managed to reach level 6 Qi condensation, while some have yet to break through to level 1. Those who are slower need not feel discouraged. The path of cultivation is long and arduous. All of you are just at the beginning of things. Being slow at the start does not mean that you'll always be slow. Foundation establishment comes after Qi condensation. From there on, you will start on a major milestone of cultivation, core formation. Once you've formed the core, your lifespan would extend to 500 years as you cast away your mortal self and be known as a perfected being. After that, you will reach the nascent soul realm and your lifespan will further expand to 1,000 years as you become known as a perfected lord. There, your sea of wisdom is unlocked as you cultivate your spirit consciousness. Even if you are blinded, you will be able to sense everything around you as your spirit consciousness permeates through the world unobstructed. Post-nascent soul comes void reversion realm where you commit your heart to the Tao and refine your spirit to the void, casting away all impurities from the nascent soul. It will then evolve to an essence spirit, transparent and fearless of the world. That is when you have truly broken free of the shackles of a physical body. Other than being able to travel with merely your consciousness, it is also equivalent to having another life as it can assimilate and cultivate a body other than your physical self. Your lifespan will be 5,000 years at that stage, and at void reversion realm, you will be known as a Tao being. Su Zimo was shocked to hear this. There were 9 sections to the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. The 7th section was about core formation, the 8th was about turning into an Yin spirit, and the 9th, Yang spirit. The Yin spirit section mentioned that one would be able to perceive their own spirit after breaking through the void. Was the sea of wisdom that Ling Yun mentioned referring to that void? Did that mean that the so-called Yin spirit was the immortal equivalent of nascent soul? The Yang spirit section mentioned that one would be able to obtain a pure Yang spirit uncontaminated from Yin after refining the impurities of the Yin spirit. At later stages, one would be able to assimilate with the heaven and earth powers and gather their energy. Did that mean that the so-called Yang spirit was the immortality equivalent of essence spirit? Lowering his head, Su Zimo tried his best to contain the shock in his eyes. If he were to cultivate both as a demon and immortal, there was a high chance he would be able to obtain 2 golden cores in the future, 2 essence spirits. Chapter 74 Level 3 Spirit Fire. Chapter 74 Level 3 Spirit Fire. There are even higher realms above void reversion where one would be able to form rain in clouds with every flip of their hands. Any thought could cause rivers to reverse, bring about enough heat to burn the oceans and shift stars from their rotations. Every single step of theirs would cross thousands of meters. Those words rattled Su Zimo and the other disciples. It was as though they were already envisioning themselves ruling over the desolates while looking down at the world with disdain. Who would not look forward to power as such? Even though many of the inner sect disciples had heard those descriptions many times, it still sent ardor and zeal coursing through their blood. Sect Master Ling Yun continued with a deep voice. Head back and work hard on your cultivation. Every end of the year, our sect will organize a face-off between the 5 peaks and the rewards will be generous. Even though the 7 of you have just joined the sect, be it in terms of spirit root or potential, you are exceptional. I hope that there can be some amongst you that will obtain good results in our 5 peaks face-off. On the way back to Weapon Peak, Su Zimo asked Shui, "What's with this 5 peaks face-off?" Shui chuckled. Simply put, it's to choose the best out of the 5 peaks. For example, for the Weapon Peak face-off, the disciples of Weapon Peak would have a competition with their skills of refining weapons. The disciple that comes out top will get to choose an inferior grade spirit weapon of his desire from the spirit weapon chamber. As for Elixir Peak, they would compete in refining elixirs. The first disciple would be able to get a grade 1 elixir such as the spirit gathering pill. Frowning, Suzimo asked, "What if there are multiple disciples who can craft an inferior grade spirit weapon? How would they differentiate between the best then?" "Ha ha!" Shui burst out laughing. If any disciple could craft an inferior grade spirit weapon, they would definitely be the best of Weapon Peak. Junior brother, you've yet to experience any weapon refinement techniques yet, and so you do not know how difficult it is to craft an inferior grade spirit weapon. There has never been any disciples who could craft an inferior grade spirit weapon during the annual Weapon Peak face-off. Everyone could only manage to create pseudo-spirit weapons and our master will then judge who has the best quality. Su Zimo nodded. Shui continued. Actually, for the 5 peaks face-off, all the other peaks are merely there for show. Everyone's actually more focused on Spirit Peak's face-off. After all, the disciples would be competing in terms of battling techniques and pure strength. That's way more exciting. The rewards are even better as well. Not only do they get an inferior grade spirit weapon, a grade 1 elixir, there would also be a grade 1 talisman as well as a number of spirit stones. Junior brother, don't fixate yourself on it. After all, both refining of elixirs and weapons would require a large amount of energy and time. Rather than dreaming of other things, the most important task on hand is to steady yourself and focus on your cultivation. Even though Su Zimo did not rebut Shui, he did not agree with it in his heart. As an elixir refinement master, one could create elixirs which would be helpful for boosting their cultivations. As a weapon refinement master, one could create weapons and that was a clear benefit for raising one's strength as well. Most importantly, Su Zimo possessed a fire spirit root and that would enhance his cultivation speed, saving time. Within the 5 peaks, there would be inner sect disciples arriving daily to help the disciples with their queries and doubts. Upon returning to Weapon Peak, Su Zimo listened carefully to an inner sect disciple's explanation of the techniques of refining weapons before returning to his cave abode. The fundamental of refining weapons was to first be able to cultivate a spirit fire. Spirit fire was created by igniting spirit chi into flames. There were 3 levels to spirit fires with their difference shown through their colors: faint red, dark red and scarlet. The deeper the shade, the higher the temperature of the flame, and the more the impurities that could be purged. Above spirit fires came true fires which were faint, dark and pure gold in color. The first step of creating weapons was material selection. Be it for refinement of elixirs or weapons, the materials used were spirit items of the universe that contained spirit chi within them. The second step was the smelting process. For elixirs, special elixir furnaces were required, while for weapons, it was weapon tripods. Be it elixir furnaces or weapon tripods, they were all created using special materials that could endure through heat and not melt. By placing the spirit materials they chose into the weapon tripod and using a spirit fire to smelt it, the materials would be melted into liquid form with initial impurities preliminary purged so that it is suitable for refinement. Third step, forging. This step would require controlling the temperature to dip while forging out the shape one wanted for the spirit weapon before the liquid solidified. Of course, one would require much more effort at this step if they wanted to create something special. However, if it was just a normal flying sword, things would be much simpler. Fourth step, tempering. By increasing the temperature within the weapon tripod once more, one would then use spirit chi and the flames to strike at the weapon, conducting a secondary round of impurities elimination to ensure that the spirit weapon turns sturdier. 5-step, spirit gathering. Spirit gathering was the crux and most difficult step of the entire weapon refinement process. Within the weapon tripod, a large amount of spirit chi would be released by the melted materials and they would turn extremely pure under the repeated scorching of the spirit fire. By gathering the spirit chi and fusing it into the spirit weapon, lines of spirit patterns would form on it. And that was exactly the history of spirit weapon grades as well. If a single spirit pattern was created, it would be an inferior grade spirit weapon. If 4 spirit patterns could be created, it would be a supreme grade spirit weapon. The reason why the spirit gathering stage was difficult was because if it failed, the spirit weapon would explode within the tripod, causing all their previous efforts to go to waste. At the same time, there was a high rate of failure for spirit gathering. The more the patterns being tempered, the higher the rate of failure. 6th step, quenching. This was a simple step. Simply placing the highly heated spirit weapon into cold water would finish the forging process. Extending his left hand, Su Zimo activated the stream of spirit chi from his dantian as a weak flame formed in the middle of his palm. It was a faint red color and emanated a scorching heat. However, his palm did not feel the heat at all. Level 1 Spirit Fire. Su Zimo let out a smile. As the spirit chi dispersed, the spirit fire disappeared as well. But once he channeled spirit chi, a flame appeared in his palm once more. With that, Su Zimo continued practicing merrily. Suddenly, he recalled something. Back in Pingyang Town, perfected Song Lang had shot out a scarlet flame from his fingertips, burning Zhe Feng to nothingness. Now, Su Zimo finally realized that flame was a level 3 spirit fire. The thought of Zhe Feng's death caused Su Zimo's eyes to dim as his mood was damped. On his immortality cultivation, he had just obtained level 1 chi condensation. On his demonic cultivation, he was stuck on the progress of the marrow cleansing section even after such a long time. He wondered how long more he would have to wait to take revenge for Zhe Feng. Dai Yu had mentioned that the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness would get more difficult towards the end, and without her around, Su Zimo would not be able to complete it. And now, he was already stuck after the bones strengthening at the marrow cleansing section. What about organs refinement and orifice clearing later on? As he fell deep into thought, Su Zimo's right palm gathered a ball of spirit fire subconsciously. Swoosh! A ball of flames rose and the scarlet color was rather striking. Shocked, Su Zimo swung his hand and the spirit chi dispersed along with the spirit fire. That flame earlier on did not seem like it was faint red? Frowning, Su Zimo glared at his right palm before channeling spirit chi to create the spirit fire once more. Swoosh! Flames started rising. A bright light shone across Su Zimo's shocked face. Scarlet. Level 3 Spirit Fire. Chapter 75 Indeed Quite Incredible. Chapter 75 Indeed Quite Incredible. How could this be? Glaring at the scarlet flame in his right palm, Su Zimo wondered. Naturally, he would not assume that he had managed to create a level 3 spirit fire right after learning about it through pure talent. But what was the reason for everything before him? Opening his left palm, he channeled spirit chi and gathered a flame in that palm too. Swoosh! A faint red flame appeared. Level 1 spirit fire. Both balls of flames continued burning in Su Zimo's palms with strikingly different color, and a distinct difference in temperature too. Dissipating the flames, he tried again a couple more times. Each time, his left palm would always form a level 1 spirit fire while his right palm could reach level 3. Su Zimo thought back to a detail of qi condensation. The second step of qi condensation was to absorb the qi internally. Back then, the spirit qi in the air entered his body from his right hand. What did that imply? Frowning, he looked at his right hand for a long time but could not find anything unusual about it. Even after a long time, Su Zimo could not figure out what was going on and decided to let the doubt go for now. No matter what, it wasn't a bad thing for him to have a level 3 spirit fire right as he was starting to learn about weapon refinement. The higher the level of spirit fire, the more efficient the purging of impurities from the materials would be. Normally, a level 3 spirit weapon could even refine a middle-grade spirit weapon. But of course, the level of spirit fire was only one of the core factors for a weapon refinement master. They had to be able to control the spirit fire, temperature, and the most important process of spirit gathering. If any of the 6 steps were to go wrong, they would not be able to create any spirit weapons. For weapon refinement masters, they were divided to elementary, intermediate, and advanced depending on the grade of spirit weapons they can refine. Only those that can create superior grade spirit weapons could be termed as advanced weapon refinement masters. For most perfected golden cores, the spirit weapons they use would not be higher than superior grade. Therefore, in the cultivation world, if anyone could become an advanced weapon refinement master, their status would be equivalent to that of a perfected golden core. In fact, in terms of reputation and networking, they would even surpass the average perfected golden core. However, even advanced weapon refinement masters would not dare to casually attempt for supreme-grade spirit weapons given the high failure rate. As a disciple of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo obtained a weapon tripod from the elderly guard and spent the rest of his time training on his weapon refinement skills in his cave abode. Occasionally, he would train his qi condensation and spend the nights reading into the marrow cleansing section. A month later, Su Zimo's cultivation realm was at level 5 qi condensation and he was getting better at weapon refinement, having created a couple of pseudo-spirit flying swords successfully. However, he still had no progress on the marrow cleansing section. To be accurate, he did not even know how to carry on with it. The marrow cleansing section stated that he would be able to achieve marrow cleansing by quivering the marrow with the sounds of tigers and leopards. Having stayed an entire year in the Tianhuang mountain range, he was extremely familiar with the sounds of tigers and leopards. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to imitate it, he could not achieve the desired effect of marrow cleansing. Su Zimo was even almost going hoarse by the end of the month. He could feel that he was not going in the right direction, so he intended to look for an opportunity to capture a tiger and a leopard so that he could slowly work with that sound requirement. This day, Su Zimo came forth from his cave abode. Every end of the month, the 5 peaks would have a simple test held. It was not compulsory, and any disciples of the various peaks could take part. The first place of the test would have a chance to observe the projections of seniors in the sect refining weapons. One had to understand that every weapon refinement master had a different method of doing things. It was particularly so for the step of tempering in the weapon tripod, which was extremely secretive and not shown to most people. Through the entire month, Su Zimo had quite a number of doubts gathered. If he could take a look at those projections, it would be of great help to him. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at the Weapon Peak's Weapon Refinement Hall on a flying sword. He took a quick glance and there were more than 100 people present. Weapon Peak's trial disciples added up to a few dozens of people. Where did the rest come from? You're here, junior brother Su. Right then, Shui walked over from the side and greeted Su Zimo merrily. Not bad, you're already at level 5 qi condensation, Shui exclaimed before asking. Why? Are you here for the month-end test too? Yeah, I want to give it a shot. Su Zimo nodded his head. Sure, that's good. You can also learn by looking at the way others go about it. Shui thought that Su Zimo was merely there to join the crowd since the latter had just gotten started on refining weapons. Senior brother, we've only got a couple dozens of disciples in Weapon Peak. Why are there so many people? Su Zimo asked. Shui smiled. Within the sect, any of the disciples from the other 4 peaks who have an interest towards weapon refinement can come to Weapon Peak to learn and take part in the month-end test as well. In fact, even in the year-end face-off if they want to. After all, for some of the geniuses, they will want to learn about weapons, elixirs, talismans and array formations even as they cultivate themselves. Su Zimo nodded his head. That was the same as what he thought. Su Zimo swept his gaze casually across the crowd before fixating it on a man clad in purple robes. The purple-robed man looked haughty with his head slightly reared and eyes closed. It was easy to spot him from the crowd. That man was Feng Haoyu, the person with a variant wind spirit root who had joined the sect at the same time as Su Zimo. After a month, Feng Haoyu had already gone from level 6 to level 7 Qi condensation. Shui followed Su Zimo's gaze and said, I heard that man is called the most talented genius our sect has obtained in 1,000 years. With his innate variant spirit root and an exceptional talent, many of the seniors think extremely highly of him. I've even heard that he's going to take part in the year-end face-off and boasted that he was definitely going to be the top of 3 peaks. Top of 3 peaks? Su Zimo frowned. Shui explained. Even though he's a new disciple, he has a wind spirit root and by the end of the year, he would definitely be a level 9 or 10 Qi refinement warrior. The only person that can compete with him in Spirit Peak is a woman called Ling Ro. I heard that she's also a new disciple. Even if he gets to be the top of Spirit Peak, what about the other 2? Su Zimo asked. Shui lamented. Elixir and Weapon Peak. Our 2 peaks are the weakest in the sect. Even though it's good for the sect that we have a Feng Haoyu, it's still going to feel bad for us as disciples of Weapon Peak if he turns out top for our peak. Su Zimo was confused. Feng Haoyu has a wind spirit root. In terms of fire mastery, can he compete with Weapon Peak disciples with fire spirit roots? Junior brother, you know that anyone can create spirit fire regardless of their spirit root attributes? Shui asked in reverse. Su Zimo nodded. Anyone could create a spirit fire without a fire spirit root. It was just that in terms of sensing, cultivation and mastery of it, those with a fire spirit root would be more astute to it. Shui continued. Fire blossoms with the presence of wind. That is Feng Haoyu's advantage. Suddenly, Su Zimo realized. Under the influence of wind, fire burns ever brighter. Shui whispered. I heard that Feng Haoyu's already able to create a level 2 spirit fire. Stunned for a moment, Su Zimo looked at his right hand and nodded. That's indeed quite incredible. Chapter 76 Test Commencement. Chapter 76 Test Commencement. Quite incredible. That's extremely incredible. Shui lamented softly. I've already been in Ethereal sect for 6 years now, and I'm only edging at the border of level 2 spirit fire. Head, let's not talk about these anymore. Picking himself up, Shui shrugged his shoulders. But if Feng Haoyu really does become accomplished in both refining elixirs and weapons and end up making a name for himself in those rankings during the sect competition, that would be quite the honor for our sect too, isn't it? Smiling, Su Zimo nodded. Everyone, please be silent. Right then, a Foundation establishment cultivator appeared at the front of the weapon refinement hall and pushed his hands down, causing the chatter in the hall to die down. Everyone, please head forth and select your materials before finding an empty spot within the hall on your own to refine your weapons. The test commences now. All of the disciples began dispersing after choosing their materials as Su Zimo and Shui waited before choosing a spot at the back of the hall. With his hands behind his back, Feng Haoyu stood right in front with a haughty expression. No one dared to stand shoulder to shoulder against him. Before this, Feng Haoyu had already asked around and found out that none of the trial disciples within the 5 peaks had managed to create a level 2 spirit fire. The best amongst them was nearly bordering on the edge of level 2. Thus, Feng Haoyu was extremely confident that he would definitely be able to top this month-end test and obtain the rights to view projections of the weapon refinement process left behind by seniors of the sect. Bam! Retrieving a weapon tripod from his storage bag, Feng Haoyu slammed it heavily on the ground and the entire hall rattled. Every single one of his actions attracted everyone's attention. None of the 100-odd disciples attending the test were in any hurry as they all looked at Feng Haoyu after placing down their weapon tripod. Feng Haoyu's lips curled. Even though he did not turn around, he could feel the searing gazes that contained jealousy and envy. That was the type of feeling he enjoyed. The adoration of the masses. Extending his palm out slowly, Feng Haoyu channeled spirit qi. A ball of flames rose. It was merely a faint red color, level 1 spirit fire. The entire hall went silent as everyone watched the man right at the front with bated breaths. Swoosh! Feng Haoyu extended his other palm as a stream of spirit qi shot out from his fingertips, entering the initial ball of flames. With a loud rumble, the flame burned brightly as its color deepened. Before long, it was a dark red color. Level 2 spirit fire! The crowd went into an uproar. Even though many disciples of the sect had heard about it, they were still shocked seeing a level 2 spirit fire personally. A level 2 spirit weapon would improve the success rate of creating inferior grade spirit weapons greatly, and was something that many cultivators would not be able to achieve in their lifetimes. Sensing emotions running high in the crowd, a look of glee flickered through Feng Haoyu's eyes as he pushed the ball of level 2 spirit fire into his weapon tripod where it continued to burn. He was warming his tripod. First, the area around the weapon tripod had to be warmed evenly using spirit fire, and after the temperature was balanced, the materials would be inserted. Because weapon refinement was a long process, many of the cultivators behind Feng Haoyu began to gather their own spirit fires and work on the tripod warming phase as well. Shui looked at Su Zimo. Let's start too, junior brother Su. Okay. Su Zimo nodded. Shui extended his palm as a ball of flames rose. Even though it was a level 1 spirit fire, its color was darker and showed vague signs of evolving to a level 2 spirit fire. One did not have to concentrate too much on the tripod warming process. Shui circled his spirit fire around the weapon tripod before letting it burn at the bottom, and turning his head over to Su Zimo. He thought that he may be able to provide some advice given that this junior brother of his had just started on the craft of weapon refinement, and might not be used to it. However, that move of Shui rooted him where he stood. There was a ball of fervent flames burning on Su Zimo's palm, and the color of it was somewhat piercing. Shui was completely stumped as his mind went blank. He did not even notice that the flames beneath his weapon tripod had extinguished. Su Zimo was learning from others around him as well by surrounding his spirit fire around the weapon tripod before letting it burn at the bottom. The process of warming the tripod was something that was not mentioned when the intersect disciples explained things previously. Through the entire month, Su Zimo had not practiced warming the tripod in his seclusion. Seems like this test wasn't a wasted trip. I got something out of it. Su Zimo was delighted internally. J Junior Brother Su! Why your spirit fire? Right then, Shui's stammering voice sounded out in Su Zimo's ears. Turning around, Su Zimo smiled. I got lucky and somehow managed to cultivate out a level 3 spirit fire by accident. He was not saying it out of humility. It was cultivated through accident, and he did not know the reason for it till this day. Shui's eyes were widened as his jaws nearly dropped to the ground. This was the first time that he had heard someone say they created a level 3 spirit fire out of sheer luck by accident. Even though their voices weren't loud, the surrounding disciples heard everything loud and clear. Level 3 spirit fire? Dream on! Some of the disciples in front turned around and were stumped as well. An odd tension began to spread and permeate through the hall. Standing right at the front, Feng Haoyu seemed to have felt something as he frowned. However, he did not turn around out of arrogance. Within the hall, There was no one worth his attention to turn around. Suddenly, an ear-piercing shriek broke the odd tension in the hall. Level 3 Spirit Fire! After that shriek, the entire hall went bonkers. Scarlet! It's truly a Level 3 Spirit Fire! Who is this person? He doesn't look familiar. How have we not seen him before? I think he's one of the new disciples who joined this year. This is way too incredible. This man is only a level 5 Chi Refinement warrior, and yet he's able to cultivate a level 3 Spirit Fire? What sort of talent is that? When he heard the discussion going on behind him, Feng Haoyu's expression turned grim. Standing silently, he composed himself and turned around slowly, looking back indifferently. The scarlet flame was the first thing that entered his line of sight. Right after, a face with sharp features and green robes that he had seen before. Him again! Feng Haoyu narrowed his eyes coldly. Sensing enmity, Su Zimo, who was initially still warming his tripod, looked over instinctively. What keen senses! Feng Haoyu remarked internally. He had already kept his enmity well hidden, but he had not expected that Su Zimo would notice it still. Their gazes met for a brief moment as Feng Haoyu turned back indifferently, haughty as ever. On the surface, it seemed as though Feng Haoyu did not take it to heart. However, the level 2 spirit fire beneath his weapon tripod had already been extinguished. That was a clear sign of his shock. Su Zimo smiled and thought nothing more of it. Noticing that his weapon tripod was already warm, he was about to insert his materials when a head suddenly popped out beside him. He was so shocked that he pulled his cold moon saber out of his storage bag and almost slashed forth. Greetings, Master! Greetings, Peak Master! When the disciples in the hall saw who it was, all of them greeted. Su Zimo coughed gently, keeping his cold moon saber without a trace. Chapter 77 Found a Treasure. Chapter 77 Found a Treasure. Unknowingly, the disheveled old Peak Master of Weapon Peak had made his way to the Weapon Refinement Hall and appeared beside Su Zimo. The disheveled old man eyed the cold moon saber that Su Zimo kept and asked casually, Lad, why are you always trying to stab others over every single disagreement? When he was joining the sect at the top of the front peak, Su Zimo slashed out at Array Peak's master right after he came forth from the illusion. Now, he nearly did the same to Weapon Peak's master. With an awkward expression, Su Zimo was ready to disperse his spirit fire and apologize to his master. However, the disheveled old man merely waved it off and shook his head. It's fine, continue with what you were doing. I'll just be watching from the side, no pressure. All right. Su Zimo nodded his head. Pausing for a moment, the disheveled old man patted Su Zimo on the shoulders and commented sincerely. Lad, you don't have to be strung up all day all night in Ethereal sect. Relax, no one is going to hurt you. Don't brandish your saber for every small reason. In reality, Su Zimo's reaction was trained during his time in Songlang mountain range and had already become a habit. Outside the mountain range, every single beast was an enemy to Su Zimo. Even back in his cave, he had to be alert against the spirit monkey's mischievous attacks. That was why he was so neurotic. However, it did not mean that Su Zimo would let his guard loose just because of what the disheveled old man said. He would merely pay more attention so that he would not brandish his saber casually. The disheveled old man continued. Besides, even if you want to brandish it, you've got to see your opponent first. 1 month into the sect and you've already pointed your saber at 2 peak masters. What's going to happen the longer you stay? Cough, cough. I'll take note of it. Su Zimo chuckled embarrassedly. Usually, none of the peak masters would appear for a month-end test as such, especially not the peak master of Weapon Peak who was known to be lazy by nature. Yet, everyone present was clear why the disheveled old man was appearing now. It was definitely not for Feng Haoyu, but Su Zimo. Right then, Feng Haoyu, who was standing right at the front, had a burning sensation on his face. However, because he was back facing everyone else, no one could tell of the coldness in his eyes. Composing his emotions, Feng Haoyu began to warm the tripod once more. At the back of the hall, Su Zimo had already begun to insert the materials since his level 3 spirit fire was not extinguished. With all the materials inserted, he channeled a large amount of spirit chi and flames burned furiously, enveloping the entire weapon tripod. The temperature in the tripod continued to climb. The process of smelting was to turn all the materials to liquid state using a high temperature before fusing them together once more, removing as much impurities from them as possible. It was a step that had nothing to do with weapon refinement technique and was a clear indicator of the difference between different levels of spirit fire. Even if it was an advanced weapon refinement master wielding a level 2 spirit fire, he would not be able to match an amateur with a level 3 spirit fire during the smelting process. Before long, the materials in the tripod had begun to melt before turning into a metal liquid that emanated spirit chi. The level 3 spirit fire continued burning. The golden liquid burnt within the tripod, bubbling endlessly as the spirit chi inside thickened. At that, the disheveled old man's eyes flickered with a hint of satisfaction as he nodded. The metal liquid glowed bright red as the quantity was condensed through the repeated scorching, that was due to impurities being purged away. 15 minutes later, the metal liquid was no longer condensing. That did not imply that it was free of impurities. It was merely the smelting limits of a level 3 spirit fire. The smelting process was over. Right then, the materials of the other disciples had merely only started to melt. Of them, Feng Haoyu's speed was faster as a metal liquid was formed within his tripod. Not only was the level 3 spirit fire better in purging impurities, it was faster as well as Su Zimo led the pack far ahead. The next step, forging. Su Zimo dispersed his spirit fire and waited for the temperature within the tripod to dip. At the same time, he cultivated and rested at the side, replenishing the spirit chi he had expended. Forging required channeling of spirit chi to create a pair of spirit hands which would be inserted into the weapon tripod. One would then have to forge the shape of the spirit weapon they wanted before the metal liquid solidified. If one entered too early when the temperature was too high, notwithstanding the fact that the spirit hands may disperse easily, it would be difficult to forge the weapon since the metal liquid would not be completely cooled. However, if it was too late and the metal liquid was completely solidified, one would not be able to forge as well. This step was a test of experience. After 5 minutes, Su Zimo suddenly bolted up and channeled his spirit chi fervently. A pair of hands appeared in midair that reached into the weapon tripod, grabbing hold of the metal liquid. That was the perfect moment when the metal liquid was malleable without solidifying just yet. At the side, the disheveled old man was getting more pleased as he watched the focused Su Zimo. Bloody hell, I've really found a treasure this time round. If not for the fact that so many disciples were present, the disheveled old man could not wish for more than to hug Su Zimo tightly for a kiss right then. For some reason, Su Zimo felt a gust of cold wind behind his ass and could not help but broke into a shudder. Before long, a flying sword slowly took shape. The blade was long without any edge yet. This was merely a rough shape. By now, many of the disciples had given up on the test and were watching Su Zimo's weapon refinement process instead. When they noticed the shape of the sword being crafted, a shushing sound spread out from the crowd. Feng Haoyu was done with his smelting at the moment, and was waiting for the temperature in the weapon tripod to dip. As he sat where he was to rest, he could not help but turn around to check out the commotion. The moment he saw the shape of the sword in Su Zimo's weapon tripod, he scoffed with a look of mockery and turned back. After the forging was complete, Su Zimo could naturally sense the strange tension around him. "Master, have I made a mistake?" he could not help but ask. The disheveled old man waved it off and replied nonchalantly, "It's not really a huge mistake. You've grasped the forging timing really finely. It's just that you've added an additional hilt to your sword." "An additional hilt?" Su Zimo froze for a moment, confused. The disheveled old man asked, "Do you know why most of the flying swords cultivators use do not have a hilt?" Su Zimo shook his head. A flying sword is the most common Dharma treasure for swords in the cultivation world. Its advantage is that it's fast, agile, versatile, and both ends are bladed. Unlike a normal sword, A flying sword does not have a hilt because the presence of it leads to greater air resistance, and in turn, a lower speed and agility. Suddenly, Su Zimo's eyes lit up. In the past, he did demonic cultivation and was always engaging in melee combat with others. Now, he was less than a month into immortality cultivation and did not have much practice with swords yet. At the end of the day, immortal and demonic cultivation were different. Cultivators do not go against others by wielding flying swords with their hands. Instead, they channeled their spirit chi into a stream of energy so as to control flying swords from afar. During a fight, if a flying sword that struck the enemy has a hilt, the sword would not pass through their bodies. Without a hilt, the flying sword would pierce their bodies with ease, allowing the cultivators to continue controlling it without being affected. If the opponent had a body tempering technique which gave them an extremely robust physical body, a flying sword with a hilt may end up in their hands instead. Without a hilt, the sword would be edged at every point and the opponent would not be able to catch it barehanded. For a flying sword, a hilt was nothing more than a burden. Chapter 78 I Don't Care. Chapter 78 I Don't Care. The disheveled old man consoled him. It's just a small mistake. Just be more careful in the future. Don't be discouraged. Su Zimo nodded. No matter the end result, his trip today was not wasted. Even though forging looked to be a simple step, there were many factors to consider when shaping a spirit weapon so as to unleash its full potential. Fourth step, tempering. The forged flying sword hovered within the weapon tripod as Su Zimo reignited a new ball of level 3 spirit fire to heat it up. Temperature control was crucial for this step. Too high and the flying sword would melt. Too low and the desired effect of tempering would not be achieved. It was crucial to have the spirit weapon burn at a scarlet, transparent color. Through the past month, Su Zimo had failed countless times at just the tempering step. After a brief moment, the flying sword in the weapon tripod began to turn red. Under the continued burning of the flames, the sword's body gleamed with a bright red. Su Zimo maintained his control and placed the flying sword at the bottom of the tripod before conjuring a hammer using spirit chi to start the tempering process. Cling! Clang! Tempering can not only eliminate even more impurities, it can strengthen the sturdiness of the sword as well. Out of all 6 steps, this step was where technique was most important, and every weapon refinement master had their own way of doing things. Su Zimo went about it with pure brute strength as he knocked at the sword. The disheveled old man who was watching him frowned. Su Zimo was way too rough in his technique and was no different from blacksmiths of the mortal world. At the same time, Feng Haoyu had begun tempering his flying sword as well. Unlike Su Zimo, Feng Haoyu was much cleaner in his tempering skills. Feng Haoyu had a wind spirit root and because of that, the element of wind spirit chi was present in the hammer he conjured to strike at the flying sword. Because of that, the tempered sword would be more agile and swifter. While hammering, the sharpness of the sword was gradually revealed too. It was clear that Feng Haoyu was experienced through his technique and faster. Before long, he was almost caught up to Su Zimo. After 5 minutes, Su Zimo heaved out a sigh of relief. He was done with tempering. For a pseudo-spirit weapon, the final step would be to just throw the scarlet flying sword into cold water for the quenching step. However, Su Zimo had an idea. Since this flying sword had a hilt, and was imperfect to begin with, he could attempt spirit gathering with it. For the past month, Su Zimo had already destroyed tens of flying swords without a single success on spirit gathering. Based on what the inner sect disciples mentioned, there was no technique required for spirit gathering, and it was more of a luck thing. The luckier one was, the higher the chances of success. But of course, that was on the pretext that there were no major issues with the 4 previous steps. After tempering, Su Zimo did not shift the flying sword out of the weapon tripod and instead glared at the spirit chi within it keenly. Is he thinking of spirit gathering? If he manages to succeed, that'll be amazing. I think he's thinking too highly of himself trying to attempt spirit gathering after a single month into weapon refinement. A series of discussions filled with shock and ridicule broke out around them. Casting away all distractions, Su Zimo calmed his mind. This was a step that required absolute focus from the weapon refinement master without any bit of distractions. Taking in a deep breath of air, he controlled the spirit chi within the tripod and willed it towards the scarlet flying sword. Through the pressure, a pattern appeared vaguely on the sword. It was faint and barely formed. Look, a spirit pattern! It's really a spirit pattern. But it has yet to take shape. Could he really manage to create an inferior-grade flying sword? Right then, Feng Haoyu was just done with his tempering step as well. When he heard the discussions, his heart skipped a beat as he turned towards Su Zimo. If Su Zimo had managed to create an inferior-grade spirit weapon, he would have to take the gambit and attempt spirit gathering too. However, Feng Haoyu had no confidence about it. After all, spirit gathering was way too difficult, and he had yet to succeed at it too. The disheveled old man glared at the flying sword within the tripod fixedly, sweat forming on his palms. He was even more nervous than Su Zimo. Piak! Right then, a crisp sound rang out from Su Zimo's weapon tripod. It was over! Su Zimo lamented internally. What followed was a booming sound as the flying sword exploded with its shards striking at the interiors of the weapon tripod. He had failed. However, it was to be expected. Su Zimo shook his head and chuckled in exasperation. The disheveled old man sighed gently. At the side, Shui looked on with pity. At that, Feng Haoyu was finally relieved. Because Su Zimo's flying sword had exploded, Feng Haoyu had no intention to attempt spirit gathering as well. Instead, he took out the pseudo-spirit weapon from his tripod and dipped it in cold water. Clack! A thick, white smoke billowed out from the water basin. The flying sword was successfully created with a sharp gleam and a suffocating aura. Feng Haoyu placed the flying sword at the front desk and awaited the evaluation results. Right as Su Zimo kept his weapon tripod, a loud voice boomed out in the hall. The level of one's spirit fire isn't listed as one of the 6 steps of weapon refinement. Don't think that you'll become a weapon refinement master just because you can cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. Su Zimo turned to the voice and met with Feng Haoyu's cold, sneering gaze. With a fake smile, Feng Haoyu continued, Junior brother Su, one has to be tread steadily. If one were to attempt flying before they can even walk, they might end up falling twice as heavily. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. The both of them had only met a couple of times before and had never spoken nor crossed one another's paths. Yet, for some unknown reason, Feng Haoyu had a strong enmity towards him. It was particularly so today. Well said, junior brother Feng. Fufu, some people are way over their heads because they have a level 3 spirit fire. Know your place. The disciples who spoke were not from Weapon Peak. They were Spirit Peak disciples who had come to take the test. There was naturally no way they would give up on a chance to take sides with Feng Haoyu by mocking Su Zimo at such a juncture. Stop with all that salty talk. How about talking again after any of you can get a level 3 spirit fire? Shui could not help but stand up and scoff coldly. Many of the Spirit Peak disciples found themselves speechless as they looked awful. No matter what, even if Su Zimo had failed in spirit gathering, it was a fact that he had managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. No one from the 5 peaks could match that. Feng Haoyu continued, Junior brother Su, don't take this loss to heart. We've still got the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year. I hope that you'll be able to win me by then. Su Zimo looked at Feng Haoyu indifferently without replying. The disheveled old man stood at the side watching without saying anything. At the end of the day, he was a senior and was naturally not bothered with the verbal squabbles between disciples. After a while, the disciple hosting the test declared, Even though all of you crafted a pseudo-spirit weapon, Feng Haoyu's flying sword has a better quality and he was faster. As such, he is the first place for this test. Many Spirit Peak disciples began cheering. Feng Haoyu grinned as he looked past Su Zimo to the disheveled old man. Bowing slightly, he spoke. Peak Master, please take me to observe the projections of weapon refinement left behind by seniors of the sect. The disheveled old man nodded nonchalantly. You're naturally qualified since you took first place. Thereafter, he yanked Su Zimo by the arm and commented casually. Come on, lad. You'll go have a look too. Su Zimo froze for a moment. Feng Haoyu frowned and said gruffly. Su Zimo doesn't even have a ranking place in this test because he failed to create a weapon. So, he isn't qualified to watch it. Are you sure what you're doing is appropriate, Peak Master? Indeed, it's inappropriate. The disheveled old man nodded in agreement before grinning. But I don't care. Chapter 79 The Spirit Perception of a Weapon Refinement Master. Chapter 79 The Spirit Perception of a Weapon Refinement Master. That rebuttal by the disheveled old man nearly choked Feng Haoyu to death. He was clearly being unreasonable and dishonest about it. However, with his status as the Peak Master of Weapon Peak, Feng Haoyu could not say anything about his indignance and could only swallow it. While all the disciples watched enviously, the disheveled old man brought Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu into the inner hall. The inner hall wasn't large at merely dozens of square meters. The walls were lined densely with more than 1,000 jade scrolls. Most of them were dim in color except for 100 or so that shone lusciously bright. The disheveled old man pointed at the jade scrolls on the wall. These are the projections left by weapon refinement masters since the beginning of Ethereal sect. Those bright ones are the projections of the successful spirit weapon refinements. Even though the remaining ones are projections of failures, they are of weapon refinement masters as well. Each of you can choose 10 to observe. Even though it seemed as though there were many jade scrolls, one had to understand that Ethereal sect was founded thousands of years ago. Yet, only these jade scrolls remained and majority of them were projections of failures. Without thinking twice, Feng Haoyu went for 10 lusciously bright jade scrolls. Those were projections of successful spirit weapon refinements. Su Zimo mulled for a short period of time before choosing 5 bright and 5 dim ones. He understood that while there were things to learn from successes, he could also learn how to prevent similar mistakes from happening by looking at the failures. When the disheveled old man saw that, he nodded to himself. For a weapon refinement master, it was difficult to replicate the successes of others. However, they could prevent similar mistakes. That was a form of wisdom as well. Su Zimo took the 10 jade scrolls and assumed a lotus position. Injecting spirit chi into the scrolls, the patterns on them shone brightly as a clear image appeared before him. He was immersed into it, deepening his insights towards weapon refinement, while clearing the many doubts he had accumulated. In the blink of an eye, a day and night had passed. Feng Haoyu stood up and returned the 10 jade scrolls. He took a casual glance at Su Zimo, who was still immersed in learning, and left the weapon refinement hall. Before long, Su Zimo stood up and returned the jade scrolls too. How was it? You've learned a lot, right? The disheveled old man asked, smiling. Su Zimo nodded his head and asked after pondering. Indeed, I've learned something for the first 4 steps of weapon refinement. However, I'm still clueless towards spirit gathering. The difficulty of spirit gathering lies in the fact that spirit chi existed in a stable state within the materials. However, after the smelting and combining process, there is a stark change to the structure of the flying sword. Because of that, it is astronomically difficult to infuse the spirit chi back into the flying sword. Coupled with the fact that the flying sword would be heated to a scarlet-red state, any misalignment in synergy would result in an immediate explosion. The disheveled old man then sighed gently. It's not just you. Even advanced weapon refinement masters would not dare to proclaim a 100% spirit gathering success rate. Most of them develop a sense of spirit perception after many years of refining weapons. The mention of that had Su Zimo's heart skipping a beat. Spirit perception? Through the experience of life and death, as well as the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, Su Zimo had already developed a sense of spirit perception. However, could he apply that same spirit perception to spirit gathering? His mind began to tinker, wondering if he could work in that direction. Head back first. If you've got any doubts, feel free to look for me here at any time. As he said that, the disheveled old man pointed to the jade scrolls on the wall and winked to Su Zimo. Suddenly, Su Zimo realized what the disheveled old man meant. He was hinting to Su Zimo that by coming over to look for him, the latter could seize the opportunity to look through the jade scrolls on the wall. "Thank you, master." Su Zimo bowed with a warm sense of thankfulness seeping into his heart. The moment he walked out of the weapon refinement hall, he saw someone at the entrance. Foggy. He seemed to have waited for a long time. Su Zimo frowned slightly. Right as he was about to summon a flying sword to return to his cave abode, Foggy turned around and with a slightly reared head, blocked Su Zimo's path with his hand. "Is there anything?" Su Zimo found himself irked by the haughty expression of this man. Foggy replied indifferently. "At the end of this year, I want to make history in Ethereal sect and be the top of 3 peaks with Weapon Peak being one of them. Junior brother Su, you're a smart man. I'm sure you know what to do." "I don't." Su Zimo shook his head expressionlessly. "Are you challenging me?" Foggy narrowed his gaze and released his level 7 chi condensation. Instantly, a cold gust of wind shrouded around him. "You're crazy!" With a cold scoff, Su Zimo rode his flying sword and left the weapon refinement hall in the blink of an eye, disappearing from Foggy's sights. Back in the cave abode, Su Zimo sat on his bed and thought about the contents of the 10 jade scrolls. Before long, a hurried knock sounded on his door. "Bro, it's me!" It was Little Fatty's voice. They had not seen one another in a month and Little Fatty was at level 6 chi condensation as well. The cultivation speed of those with a heaven spirit root was indeed frightening. There was a high chance that Foggy, Lingro and the Little Fatty could be at level 9 or perfected chi condensation before the end of the year. "Bro, I heard that you made an enemy out of Foggy?" That was Little Fatty's first question. Su Zimo asked. "You even know about something like that?" "It's not just me. News of this has already spread through all 5 peaks and many disciples are talking about it." Little Fatty then sighed. "Bro, that's a little irrational. Each of us can cultivate on our own. What has that got to do with anything?" Su Zimo chuckled casually, totally indifferent about it. "Things are not that simple." Little Fatty continued. "The sect prohibits disciples from killing one another internally and therefore you can reject even if he comes to challenge you. However, things are different out of the sect. Bro, you can't stay in the sect forever, right? Most of the sect's missions require you to head out. Foggy has gathered a lot of disciples on his side by now. The moment you step out of the sect, many of them are going to cause trouble for you." Su Zimo raised his brow without saying anything. Little Fatty went on. "Actually, given Foggy's endowment, he will definitely be at Foundation Establishment Realm after the 5 peaks face off and promote to be an inner sect disciple. Bro, you can actually just avoid him this time round and take part in next year's face-off. That way, he'll owe you a favor too. Let's discuss this another time." Su Zimo declined to comment further. Little Fatty nodded. "No matter what, I'll always be on your side, bro. If you need me for anything, just say the word." "Alright." Su Zimo smiled. The both of them continued chatting casually before Little Fatty left. Su Zimo pondered quietly within his cave abode, deciding to head out of the sect for a bit. He was getting a little anxious now that there was no progress for the marrow cleansing section in an entire month. When he had first cultivated the bovine-tongued saber, he only understood the essence of it by observing a cow eating grass. This time round, Su Zimo decided to capture a tiger and leopard at a forest nearby the sect so that he could take a deeper look at things. Chapter 80 Change of Appearance. Chapter 80 Change of Appearance. Since he had joined, Su Zimo had not left the sect nor taken on any missions. Since he wanted to head out, Su Zimo decided to take on a mission along the way to earn some contribution points. Arriving at the mission stele of Weapon Peak, he raised his head and looked. The mission stele was divided into 2 sections. The upper section contained missions for the 5 peaks that any disciples could take on, while the lower section only had missions of weapon peak reserved for their own disciples. The further front the mission was, the more difficult it would be and the more contribution points earned. Great Rock Forest. It was located dozens of miles northward of Ethereal Peak and was abound in pure gold, a crucial material for refining flying swords. The mission to gather materials was not considered to be difficult. However, because it was in Great Rock Forest, the difficulty level became much more significant, even slightly treacherous in fact. Every single mountain range and forest was bound to contain beasts. Around the outer regions, most of the beasts were either wild ones or weak spirit ones. Yet, the deeper one ventured, the stronger the beasts were. In fact, spirit demons may even be found right in the core regions. If targeted by a spirit demon, even a Foundation establishment cultivator may not be able to escape unscathed. The gold mine was located right in the core region of Great Rock Forest. This was a mission for Weapon Peak, and even though it was already listed for some time, no one really dared to take it on. Great Rock Forest was one of the nearest forests to Ethereal Sect. Because Su Zimo had intended to head over to begin with, he took on the mission out of convenience. A sleepy elderly man rested at the mission station. From Shui, Su Zimo learned that this was one of Weapon Peak's 3 elders, Elder Lu. The disheveled old man, Elder Li, who kept guard over the Weapon Peak, and Elder Lu were the 3 elders of Weapon Peak. In Ethereal Peak, anyone who could gain the title of elder had to be in the Golden Core realm at least. Su Zimo came before Elder Lu and handed the latter his sect badge. Raising his head, Elder Lu frowned before throwing the sect badge back to Su Zimo and barking coldly. "Not allowed to go." "Why?" Su Zimo asked. Elder Lu rolled his eyes and replied, "Are you stupid, lad? You want to court death going to Great Rock Forest with level 5 Qi condensation? Even perfected Qi refinement warriors would have to form a team to take on this mission. I just want to go take a look. If it's dangerous, I'll leave for sure." Su Zimo smiled. In truth, even though Great Rock Forest was dangerous, the mission wasn't too difficult for someone like Su Zimo who had spirit perception. "You think you can escape if you really come across any danger?" Elder Lu pouted his lips. "Look how weak you are. Say, don't blame me for not reminding you if you die out there." "Don't worry, Elder. I'm not going to die. I'm quite the lucky man." Su Zimo chuckled. Harumphing coldly, Elder Lu made a record and the mission on the steel dimmed in color, indicating that someone had taken it on. After a brief silence, Elder Lu pulled out an intricate paper crane from his storage bag and passed it to Su Zimo. "This spirit crane is used for communications in our sect. If you really encounter trouble, you just have to let this fly." "Thank you, Elder." Su Zimo kept the spirit crane in his storage bag and cupped his fists before leaving Weapon Peak on his flying sword. Closing his eyes lazily, Elder Lu went back to sleep before grumbling. "Juniors these days really don't know what's good for them." This was Su Zimo's first time out of the peak after joining it for a month. He took out the spirit crane that Elder Lu gave him and observed it. He had seen something like this before once. Back in Yen Country's capital, when Su Zimo was chasing after the one-armed cultivator from Joyful Clan, the latter had sent a similar paper crane to inform his sect about it. There were mysterious patterns drawn on the paper crane, and it would be activated by injecting spirit chi. Su Zimo had a hunch that this paper crane was in reality a type of talisman. Keeping it, he suddenly frowned as something jolted through his heart. Someone was following him. Su Zimo scoffed internally. For someone to follow him right after leaving the sect? There was no need to think further. The stalker was definitely from their sect. Could little Fatty be right? Feng Haoyu is really trying to cause trouble for me outside? With an unchanged expression, Su Zimo sped towards the direction of Great Rock Forest without any reaction. Before long, he arrived at the border of Great Rock Forest. Along the way, Su Zimo had gathered vaguely that there were 5 people in total behind him. The strongest of them was already at level 9 Qi condensation. If these guys are truly sent by Feng Haoyu, he really thinks highly of me. Su Zimo laughed and without hesitation, dove right into the forest. Entering the forest was akin to entering Su Zimo's territory. Here, no one was his match. Su Zimo cast away his flying sword and sprinted on his feet, zipping left and right. Before long, he lost the people trailing him and arrived at a secluded spot where he abandoned his green robes and bared his upper body. A series of cracking sounds came forth from within Su Zimo as his tendons and bones screamed together while his body expanded. In the blink of an eye, he had grown to over 2 meters tall with his flesh swelled and muscles bound together. His body had inflated entirely. Su Zimo's facial muscles contorted and joined together bizarrely. After a split second, his features had changed as he transformed into a fierce, burly man with a naked upper body. With the first 3 sections of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness completed, Su Zimo could change his appearance from head to toe such that even those close to him would not be able to recognize him. Lowering his head, Su Zimo laughed and with a swift dash, disappeared from where he was. "Senior Brother Zhou, where did that Su Zimo run off to? How did we suddenly lose track of him? That's why I said we should have made a move earlier on. How are we going to find him now that he's slipped into Great Rock Forest?" "Shut up!" Zhou Wei's face was grim as he hollered. "We were so close to the sect just now. What if a disciple heading out spots us making a move at him? We'll be punished when we head back if that happens." Zhou Wei was a trial disciple of Spirit Peak. At level 9 Qi Condensation, he was quite a somebody within it too. Then came someone like Feng Haoyu with a variant spirit root and a heavenly defying endowment, defeating him with a mere level 7 Qi Condensation. Zhou Wei had submitted completely in the face of Feng Haoyu's strength. Even though he conducted this operation on his own accord, it was with Feng Haoyu's silent consent. Apart from Zhou Wei at level 9 Qi Condensation, there were 4 others at level 7 and 8. These people were enough to teach Su Zimo a harsh lesson. Look again carefully. That Su Zimo is only at level 5 Qi Condensation. How far can he run? He's definitely at the perimeter of Great Rock Forest. Zhou Wei analyzed calmly. A Spirit Peak disciple asked. What if he already ran inside Great Rock Forest? That's for the best. If that lad gets shredded apart by the spirit beasts, he only has himself to blame. Zhou Wei replied with a cold snicker. Another Spirit Peak disciple asked. How should we deal with Su Zimo if we find him? A cold look flashed through Zhou Wei's eyes as he spoke darkly. We're forbidden to murder or cripple any fellow disciples of their martial arts. However, we can injure him severely by breaking his bones and tendons. If he can't get out of bed for the whole year, he naturally won't be able to take part in the year-end face-off for Weapon Peak. Chapter 81 I'm Innocent. Chapter 81 I'm Innocent. At a towering ancient tree nearby, a burly man with a bare upper body stood hidden within the leaves, listening clearly to everything that Zhou Wei and the others said. A cold glint flickered through the burly man's eyes. A gust of wind blew by, rustling the wind as the burly man leapt off from the tree swiftly and landed silently. Laying low to the ground, he trawled through the grass on both hands and legs, heading in the direction of Zhou Wei and the rest. He was perfectly hidden within the grass, which was around half the height of an average man. If one were to look down, they would merely feel like the grass was moving in a straight line due to the wind. No one would be able to tell that it was a person. Senior Brother Zhou, should we split up and search? Sounds like a plan. That Su Zimo's only at level 5 Qi Condensation. Any of us is enough to capture him. Zhou Wei nodded. We'll do that then. Everyone, split up and look. What are you guys looking for? The moment Zhou Wei said that, a hoarse and chilling voice rang out behind him. When Qi Refinement warriors travel on their flying swords, they would not be too high up from the ground at around 3 meters max unless necessary. That was because the higher they were, the more spirit Qi they would expend. Right then, a burly man with a bare upper body stood up behind Zhou Wei. He was a full 2 meters tall with rock-like muscles on his body, looking as though they could explode at any moment. He was just like a god that had suddenly descended with a ferocious expression. Instantly, Zhou Wei was so scared he could feel his blood curdle. He did not manage to sense someone approaching so closely to him. Suddenly, the burly man reached out and pulled Zhou Wei by the feet, yanking him down and smashing him into the ground right in front of the other 4 Spirit Peak disciples. Bam! There was a deafening sound. A human-shaped pit appeared in the ground. In the hands of this burly man, a level 9 Qi condensation cultivator like Zhou Wei was rendered helpless like a baby. Zhou Wei laid helplessly in the pit, foaming blood from his mouth with his eyes rolled back. Most of his bones were broken and his organs crushed as he fainted right then. His body was the only thing moving as it convulsed subconsciously. After smashing Zhou Wei, the burly man moved and his gaze shifted to 2 level 8 Qi refinement warriors. The 2 of them felt the blood drain from their face and without hesitation, tried to soar into the skies. However, the burly man was faster than them and with a lightning leap, he yanked the both of them down from midair. Bang! Bang! It was the exact same situation. Both of the Spirit Peak disciples fainted on the spot after being smashed by the burly man. Yikes! The remaining 2 Spirit Peak disciples were pale as a sheet as they summoned a flying sword before pointing their fingers at the burly man. Instantly, the flying swords turned into streams of light that shot out. One of them was aimed at the burly man's glabella while the other targeted his chest. Those were both fatal areas. Giving off a malicious grin, the burly man did not try to dodge as he dashed towards them. When the 2 Spirit Peak disciples saw that, they heaved a sigh of relief. That mysterious man was an idiot with brute strength, after all. This was someone that did not know how strong cultivators were such that he didn't even know to dodge against flying swords. Clang! Clang! A clanging sound rang off when they met with the burly man's glabella and chest. The flying swords were sent flying instead. Without the slightest bit of damage, the burly man continued rushing towards the 2 men. "Monster!" One of the Spirit Peak disciples yelled out in a quivering tone. His face was totally pale. He was so scared he forgot he had to run away anymore. The other disciple controlled the flying sword beneath his feet and ran as far as he could. With a casual punch, the burly man knocked the frozen disciple away. He then continued running on all 4s, leaving nothing but shadows as he chased after the escaped disciple. With a rapid leap, he hopped around a couple of towering ancient trees to close the height distance. "Come on down!" Laughing, the burly man gripped the disciple's calf and yanked him down from midair. Snap! That single grip by the burly man snapped the disciple's calf on the spot. Ah! 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 Sweating pouring down his forehead, the disciple howled in pain. Whisking that disciple, the burly man returned to their original place and grabbed the other 4 who had passed out. Carrying 3 on one hand and 2 on the other, he sped outside in huge steps. Who are you? We are disciples of Ethereal sect. How dare you attack us? Our sect will definitely not let you off if they know about it. Guichong, who was the only disciple awake, yelled at the burly man. The burly man remained silent as he dashed through the forest. Guichong found himself getting more fearful by the moment as he said in trembles. Where are you taking us to? Sir, please let us go. Sir, I know I'm in the wrong now. Suddenly, the burly man halted in his tracks and looked down at Guichong icily, asking coolly, What did you do wrong? I. Guichong was stumped by the question. He had only mentioned it out of nervousness previously, but he did not know what he had done wrong. Guichong cursed internally as he did not know where this burly man had spouted out from. Without saying anything, the latter started striking at them, and this person was unreasonably strong. None of their cultivation methods had worked on this burly man at all. After the burly man stopped in his tracks, he tossed all 5 of them on the ground and turned to leave without saying anything more. A look of disbelief spread past Guichong's face. They were alive? The burly man did not kill them. Guichong looked around. They were outside the Great Rock Forest right now, and he did not know why the burly man had brought them out and left them here before leaving himself. Sir, may I know your name and the sect you're from? Guichong shouted out indignantly. Suddenly, the burly man stopped in his tracks and turned around before walking towards him once more. Guichong broke into a shudder, wishing that he could slap himself on the mouth as he hurriedly said, "Sir! I really know where I've gone wrong this time round. I should not have asked for your name." Arriving before the five of them, the burly man grabbed their storage bags and took away all their spirit stones and elixirs before keeping them in his own storage bag. Looking at his robbed empty storage bag, Guichong wanted to break out in tears. Snickering, the burly man turned towards Great Rock Forest and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Guichong opened his storage bag with shaking hands and dug out a paper crane, writing on it with spirit chi. "We've been attacked at Great Rock Forest. The opponent is unknown and extremely strong. Please send reinforcements from the sect." Injecting spirit chi to it, the spirit crane spread its wings and transformed into a beam of light, disappearing into the skies. Guichong was injured as well and was unable to carry the other four back, merely able to wait there for the sect's reinforcements. Looking at his fellow fainted disciples, he felt despair swallowing him from within. The thought of his savings for the past few years being robbed completely by some unknown mysterious burly man had him howling out in sadness. "I'm innocent!" Chapter 82 Pure Gold Crystal. Chapter 82 Pure Gold Crystal. The mysterious burly man was of course Su Zimo. Upon returning to Great Rock Forest, he reverted to his appearance and wore his green robes, looking like a scholar once more as he sped towards the core region. The decision to change his appearance was one Su Zimo made after a lengthy consideration. Even though it was true that Zhou Wei's gang was there to cause trouble for him, something like that was difficult to explain to the sect. If all five of them were to deny it, he could do nothing about it too. Instead, he might even be the one punished for injuring them so badly. At the same time, Su Zimo's ace in the bag was his strength at melee combat, and he did not wish to have it revealed so early. Furthermore, all he had to do was change his appearance and identity, and that would be reason enough for him to loot their spirit stones and elixirs entirely. While they might feel wronged about it, they would have nowhere to complain. After all, the mysterious burly man did not exist in this world. As he approached the core of the forest, Su Zimo kept his flying sword and landed on the ground. Danger lurked all around within the forest, and Su Zimo was much more agile on the ground than the flying sword. If he met with any danger, he would be able to dodge it at the first instance. Along the way, he could sense the auras of spirit beasts. However, Su Zimo did not engage in battle and instead chose to avoid them, sprinting towards the core region of Great Rock Forest. There was a forest of ores not too far away. There, pure gold laid abundantly on the ground and shimmered brightly as Su Zimo tread over carefully. He could sense a hint of danger within the forest. There was definitely some extremely strong spirit beast or demon reigning over the area. Within the middle of the forest beside a large pure gold ore, a spirit beast with a thick armor sprawled on the ground. Its armor shone with a luscious shade of gold, covering its neck and limbs while its tail was filled with spikes. Gold-eater beast. Surviving by devouring all sorts of spirit materials and ores, it possessed a cruel nature and an immense strength. Invulnerable to weapons, there was almost no weakness to it. It was clear that the gold-eater before them was almost at the realm of a spirit demon. This was troubling. Su Zimo frowned. If it was any other spirit beast, he had the confidence of killing it there and then. However, he had no way of dealing with this gold-eater at all. Suddenly, the gold-eater, which was initially fast asleep, opened its eyes and glared at Su Zimo sharply with an immense killing intent. Roar! Rising in the blink of an eye, it hollered in the direction of Su Zimo and sprinted over. Narrowing his gaze coldly, Su Zimo pushed his feet and activated the plow heaven stride. Instantly, two deep ravines appeared beneath his feet on the ground as the mud flipped over. Against the pounce of the gold-eater, Su Zimo held his ground firmly as his aura began to rise. Right after plow heaven's stride, he leaned forward with mountain reliance. Bang! The man and beast had collided into one another. Su Zimo was knocked half a step back while the gold-eater was sent flying away, only stopping after crushing through a number of gold ores. Ha ha! Su Zimo burst out in laughter. It was at that moment that he realized his physique had evolved to a terrifying degree after he tempered it using spirit chi with the foundation of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. Even the Gold Eater's strength was not enough to withstand an impact against him. A trace of fear flickered through the Gold Eater's eyes. Activating Divine Steed Fleeting, Su Zimo appeared before the Gold Eater in the blink of an eye as he retrieved the Cold Moon saber from his storage bag and slashed towards its head. Clang! Sparks flew everywhere. The Cold Moon saber rebounded and the Gold Eater was totally unharmed. At the same time, it shook its spiked tail and swept through the air, landing squarely on Su Zimo's chest. With lightning speed, Su Zimo mentally cultivated his body petrification, causing his flesh to expand and his muscles to harden. Bang! Su Zimo fell over, slamming onto the biggest pure gold ore in the middle of the forest, causing cracks to form densely on it. The Gold Eater glared at the ore behind Su Zimo and looked a little unnerved. Rubbing his chest, Su Zimo kept his Cold Moon saber. The Cold Moon saber was no longer useful. Su Zimo could only use his own strength to fight against the Gold Eater. Once more, the man and beast fought to a corner. Opening its mouth, the Gold Eater chomped at Su Zimo, aiming for his neck. Without fear, Su Zimo suddenly reached out with both hands and grabbed the upper and lower jaws of the Gold Eater, yanking it with ferocious force. Psst! Heaving a deep breath of air, mighty as the anaconda eclipse, his chest puffed up robustly as he spun around mightily. It was a frightening sight as green veins popped up all over his arms like snakes coiling around it. Open up! With a holler, Su Zimo continued to tear. Shing! Blood filled the entire place as organs fell to the ground, creating a foul stench all around. The Gold Eater was torn into half by Su Zimo. Breathing heavily, he tossed the corpse of the Gold Eater away casually and began collecting the gold ores around. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. Within a shattered pile of gold ores stood a large pure gold crystal. It illuminated with a mysterious gleam and was almost transparent. Pure gold crystal! Su Zimo exclaimed. A pure gold crystal was an extremely rare item amongst gold ores and was hard to produce. At the same time, it was a crucial material for the refinement of middle, or even superior grade spirit weapons. I'm going to be rich! His head went into a frenzied excitement as he kept the pure gold crystal that was around the height of an average man in his storage bag. Su Zimo then shattered all the other gold ores around, but he found no more pure gold crystals. Even then, his reward for this trip was far more than he had imagined. After collecting all the gold ores around, he turned around to leave. Before long, a green-robed scholar carried a spirit tiger on his left arm and a spirit leopard on his right, walking out of the forest. At the same time, the spirit crane that Guichong sent back to Spirit Peak caused quite a stir. An elder of Spirit Peak headed towards Great Rock Forest personally with a group of disciples. Weapon Peak. Out of extreme boredom, the disheveled old man was out roaming around the top of the peak. Arriving at the mission stele, he raised his head and remarked in soft surprise. The mission for Great Rock Forest given out? Do we have such promising disciples that would head there? Elder Lu beside the mission stele opened his eyes lazily and harumphed. Some brazen lad at level 5 chi condensation went there alone. I had to give him a spirit crane in case he gets into trouble. Level 5 chi condensation? The disheveled old man frowned. As though he recalled something, he suddenly yanked Elder Lu's wrist. What's the name of that lad? Su Zimo or something? Piak. The disheveled old man slapped on the desk heavily, scaring Elder Lu so badly that he woke up right away. Are you crazy? What's with that? Elder Lu glared and scolded. You're the crazy one! The disheveled old man yelled back. That lad's the only one in Weapon Peak that can cultivate a level 3 spirit fire, but you bloody let him go to Great Rock Forest alone? I'll kill you! He's the one that cultivated the level 3 spirit fire? Elder Lu was stumped too. With a grim expression, the disheveled old man exclaimed. Sleep, sleep and sleep! That's the only thing you know to do day and night. That lad's our only hope for Weapon Peak. If anything happens to you, I'll never let you off. Stunned for a moment, Elder Lu leapt to his feet and urged, let's not waste any more time. Hurry to Great Rock Forest and save the lad. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.